Broke single dad cried at $5 birthday cake price. The baker's silent partner owned half the city and half dollars. He wept in shame over a $5 cake for his little girl. But what he didn't know was that the quiet woman behind the counter had a secret powerful enough to turn his entire life and the whole town upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The flickering alarm clock buzzed weakly, its red numbers blinking like a tired eye. Ethan Miller rolled over in his creaky twin bed, the springs protesting beneath him. The small apartment was quiet, except for the gentle hum of early morning traffic outside and the occasional drip from the leaky kitchen faucet he hadn't been able to fix yet. 4:45 a.m. He always woke before dawn, a habit from his construction days that wouldn't break. Ethan sat up slowly, running his calloused hands over his face. The mirror across the room showed a man who looked older than his 38 years, deep worry lines etched around his eyes, peppered stubble along his jaw. Their one-bedroom apartment wasn't much, but it was home. Lily slept peacefully on the pull-out couch in the living room, her small form curled around her favorite stuffed rabbit. Ethan had given up the bedroom to store their remaining furniture, pieces of their old life he couldn't bear to sell yet. In the kitchen, the linoleum floor was cold under his bare feet. Ethan opened the nearly empty refrigerator, its light flickering just like the alarm clock. The electricity had been spotty lately, but he was 3 days late on that bill already. Inside, half a loaf of bread and some strawberry jam sat lonely on the shelf. "Make it stretch," he whispered to himself, the same morning prayer he'd been saying for months now. He pulled out 2 slices of bread and popped them in the toaster, praying the electricity would hold steady long enough. While he waited, Ethan filled a glass with tap water and took his daily moment at the window. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky was turning that deep blue that promised dawn. Melissa used to love this time of day. "Morning sunshine," he whispered, thinking of her. It had been 2 years since cancer took her, but sometimes the ache felt fresh as yesterday. The toast popped up, slightly burned on one side, and he carefully spread jam over both pieces. The sound of small feet padding across the floor made him turn. Lily stood in her purple pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her dark hair was a mess of tangles, just like her mother's used to be. "You're up early, princess," Ethan said, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "The toaster woke me up," Lily yawned, climbing onto one of their 2 kitchen chairs. "Is it my birthday yet?" Ethan's heart clenched. "Tomorrow, sweetheart, one more sleep." She nodded, accepting the piece of toast he placed before her. "Can we have cake tomorrow?" "Of course we can," he said, though he had no idea how he'd manage it. The unemployment check had barely covered rent, and the $10 in his wallet felt like a stone weighing him down. Lily took a big bite of toast, jam smearing across her cheek. "Remember last year when Mommy made that chocolate cake with the rainbow sprinkles?" "I sure do." Ethan sat down across from her with his own piece of toast, though he wasn't hungry. "She put so many sprinkles on top they kept falling on the floor." Lily giggled. "And Rocky kept eating them." The mention of their old dog, another loss they'd endured when they couldn't afford to keep him, made Ethan's throat tight. "Daddy?" Lily's voice turned serious. "Are you sad?" Ethan reached across the small table and wiped the jam from her cheek with his thumb. "No, baby. Just thinking about how big you're getting. 7 years old tomorrow." "That's pretty big," she agreed solemnly. After breakfast, Ethan helped Lily get ready for school. He brushed her hair carefully, the way Melissa had shown him, and tied it back with her favorite blue ribbon. One of the few nice things they had left. Her backpack was worn, but he'd patched the holes himself. "Remember, Mrs. Martinez is picking you up after school today," he reminded her as they walked to the bus stop. "Daddy has to look for work." "I know," Lily said, skipping alongside him. "She said we could make cookies." The morning was cool, early autumn bringing a crisp edge to the air. Ethan watched other parents dropping their kids off in nice cars, wearing clean business clothes. He tugged self-consciously at his worn flannel shirt. When the bus arrived, Lily hugged him tight around the waist. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you more, princess." He watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, taking his heart with it. Back in the apartment, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and pulled out his wallet. The $10 bill was crumpled, and the coins added up to exactly 42 cents. He spread them out on the table, counting them again as if the amount might somehow change. 2 years ago, he'd been a respected construction foreman with a good salary. Then the company downsized, and he'd been one of the first to go. With Melissa's medical bills piling up and no income, everything had fallen apart so quickly. They'd lost the house, the car, their savings, everything except each other. Ethan looked at the family photo, still hanging on the wall. Him, Melissa, and Lily at the park, all smiling. It was taken just weeks before Melissa's diagnosis. She'd been so beautiful, so full of life. Her last words to him had been about Lily. "Promise me, you'll keep her laughing." Night fell early, as it always did in autumn. After tucking Lily into her makeshift bed on the pull-out couch, Ethan sat in the darkness of the kitchen. The electricity flickered again, threatening to go out completely. He held the $10 bill in his hands, running his thumb over its worn surface. Tomorrow was Lily's birthday, and she deserved so much more than what he could give her. She deserved the kind of celebration Melissa would have planned, with cake and presents and laughter. "Please, God," he whispered into the darkness, his voice catching. "Just a little more time. Help me find a way to make tomorrow special for her. She's all I have left." The only answer was the steady drip of the kitchen faucet and the sound of Lily's gentle breathing from the other room. Ethan sat there for a long time, holding his last $10.42, praying for a miracle he wasn't sure he deserved. Morning sunlight crept through the worn curtains of their small apartment, casting thin strips of gold across Lily's excited face. The fabric was threadbare in places, bought years ago when times were better, but it still managed to filter the harsh reality outside into something softer. She bounced on her toes in her favorite purple pajamas, the ones with tiny stars that were getting too short at the ankles. The elastic waistband had stretched loose from countless washings, and Ethan made a mental note to find her new ones soon, though he wasn't sure when that would be possible. "Is it cake time yet, Daddy?" Her eyes sparkled with the pure joy only a 7-year-old on her birthday could muster. She spun in a little circle, making the stars on her pajamas blur into streaks of silver light. Ethan forced a smile, trying to match her enthusiasm while his stomach knotted with worry. The $10 bill in his pocket felt both precious and pathetically small. "Not yet, sweetheart. First, we need to go on a special birthday adventure to find the perfect one." He pulled on his old work boots, the leather cracked and faded from years of construction sites. The steel toes were still solid, even if the rest of his life felt like it was falling apart. The laces were frayed, and he'd replaced them twice with whatever he could find at the dollar store. "Can I wear my sparkly shoes?" Lily asked, already running to get them from beside the front door. They were hand-me-downs from a neighbor's daughter, silver plastic flats with tiny rhinestones that caught the light. Some of the stones had fallen off, leaving small holes in the fabric, but Lily treated them like crystal slippers from a fairy tale. "Of course, princess." Ethan's throat tightened as he watched her slip them on with reverent care. Her small fingers struggled with the tiny buckles, and he knelt down to help her, his rough carpenter's hands surprisingly gentle. She deserved so much more than secondhand shoes and bargain birthday celebrations. She deserved a childhood filled with abundance instead of apologies. They walked hand in hand down Main Street, Lily skipping every few steps while humming a song she learned at school. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of autumn and the scent of burning leaves from somewhere nearby. Store windows displayed their wares like taunting reminders of everything they couldn't afford. Expensive toys with bright packaging, fancy clothes with price tags that made Ethan wince, and elaborate cakes that made his heart sink with each passing display. The contrast between the cheerful storefronts and his empty wallet felt like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. The first bakery they tried, Betty's Sweet Shop, had beautiful cakes in the window that looked like works of art. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with decorated cupcakes topped with swirls of buttercream, fancy pastries dusted with powdered sugar, and towering celebration cakes adorned with fondant flowers. The fluorescent lighting made everything gleam like jewels, and the prices written in elegant script made Ethan's stomach turn. "I'm sorry, sir," the clerk said, barely glancing up from her phone where she was scrolling through social media. Her nails were perfectly manicured, and she wore a crisp apron that looked like it had never seen actual flour. "Our smallest celebration cake starts at $15, plus tax, of course." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. Lily's hand tightened in his as they left, her sparkly shoes clicking against the polished tile floor. "It's okay, Daddy." Those cakes were too fancy anyway. They probably don't even taste good. But he could hear the forced cheerfulness in her voice, the same tone he used when trying to make disappointment sound like choice. The second shop, Paradise Pastries, was no better. The displays were even more elaborate, with cakes that looked like miniature architectural marvels. The baker, a stern-faced man with flour streaking his black apron, looked Ethan up and down with obvious judgment. His gaze lingered on Ethan's worn jacket, the one with a small tear near the left elbow that he'd mended with mismatched thread, and his scuffed boots that had seen better decades. When Ethan quietly asked about their most affordable options, speaking in barely more than a whisper to avoid embarrassing Lily, the man's lip curled slightly. His eyes held the kind of cold calculation that measured worth by wallet size. "Perhaps the grocery store would be more suitable for your budget," he said, the words dripping with condescension. He turned away before Ethan could respond, dismissing them as if they were somehow contaminating his pristine shop. Ethan's cheeks burned with shame as he led Lily out, the bell above the door seeming to mock them with its cheerful chime. She was still smiling, determined to keep her birthday bright, but he could see the slight droop in her shoulders, the way her skip had become a more subdued walk. His precious girl was learning too young about rejection and judgment, about how the world treated people who didn't have enough money to buy respect, along with their goods. Finally, they reached Sweet Grace Bakery at the end of the street. It was smaller than the others, tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop that was closed for the season. The building looked older, with warm yellow walls that had been painted recently but over older layers of different colors that showed through in small chips. A bell chimed softly as they entered, not the harsh electronic buzzer of the chain stores, but something gentle and welcoming. The scent of vanilla and freshly baked bread wrapped around them like a warm hug, mixing with hints of cinnamon and chocolate that made Ethan's empty stomach growl quietly. Simple cakes lined the display case, nothing fancy like the architectural marvels at the other shops, but they looked homemade and honest. Each one seemed made with care rather than mass-produced for profit. A small sign advertised birthday specials in neat handwriting, the ink slightly smudged as if it had been written by hand that morning. The whole place felt different, warmer, more human. Lily pressed her nose against the glass, her breath fogging the surface as she pointed at a chocolate cake with white frosting. "Look, Daddy, it has little flowers on it." Her voice carried pure delight, the kind of wonder that made everything seem possible again. The cake was small, just big enough for 2 people. Maybe 3 if they cut small pieces. Simple buttercream roses decorated the edges in soft pink and yellow, and while they weren't perfect, they were beautiful in their imperfection. It looked exactly right for a little girl's birthday, sweet and simple and made with love. Behind the counter, a woman in a flower-dusted apron smiled at them with genuine warmth. Her name tag read Maria in cheerful letters, and she had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she saw Lily's excited face. Gray streaked her dark hair, which was pulled back in a practical bun, and her hand showed the calluses of someone who worked with them every day. There was something maternal about her presence that made the tight knot in Ethan's chest loosen just slightly. "What a beautiful birthday girl," Maria said, her slight accent adding music to the words. "Is this your special day, Mija?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, practically bouncing on her toes. "I'm 7 now. Daddy says we're on a birthday adventure to find the perfect cake." "Well, you've come to the right place for adventures," Maria laughed, her eyes twinkling. "Would you like me to ring that chocolate cake up for you? I think it's perfect for a 7-year-old princess." Ethan nodded, his hand clutching the crumpled $10 bill in his pocket like a lifeline. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded so many times, worn thin at the creases. He watched as Maria carefully lifted the cake from the display case, her movements gentle and practiced, and placed it in a white box. She tied it with a simple yellow ribbon, making a neat bow that Lily watched with fascination. "That'll be $5.75, Maria said, setting the box on the counter with the same care she might use for a wedding cake worth 10 times as much. Ethan's hand trembled as he pulled out his money, the movement awkward and hesitant. $10 minus $5.75 would have left $4.25, enough for bus fare home and maybe a small treat for Lily from the corner store. But the tax, he hadn't thought about the tax. His mind had been so focused on the base price that he'd forgotten about the additional costs that always seemed to appear at the worst possible moment. The realization hit him like a physical blow, his throat closing up as he realized he was short. The silence stretched between them, heavy with his failure. He could feel Maria's eyes on him, patient but waiting, while Lily looked up at him with complete trust, still believing her daddy could make anything happen. The weight of that faith crushed him more than any of the harsh words from the other bakers. I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice rough with unshed tears that threatened to spill over. "I didn't." He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit out loud that he couldn't even buy his daughter a simple birthday cake, that he'd failed at the most basic act of fatherhood. He turned toward the door, gently tugging Lily's hand, his movements slow and defeated. Each step felt heavier than the last, his work boots suddenly seeming to weigh 100 pounds each. The cheerful yellow walls seemed to mock him now, and he could feel his daughter's confusion even though she didn't voice it. The bell would chime again when they left, marking another failure, another place where they didn't belong. "Wait, please." The gentle voice stopped Ethan in his tracks, the words floating across the warm bakery air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. He turned slowly, half expecting the kindness to evaporate like morning mist. Instead, he saw a woman with warm brown eyes and flour-dusted hands coming around the glass display counter, her movements unhurried and purposeful. Maria Alvarez wore a simple blue apron over her navy dress, the fabric soft and well-worn from countless hours spent in service to others. Her silver-streaked dark hair was tied back neatly with a faded yellow ribbon, and despite the early morning hour, her face held the serene contentment of someone who had found her calling. Fine lines around her eyes spoke of years spent smiling, and her hands, though marked by small burns and cuts from her trade, moved with the grace of an artist. "It's just cake," she said, her accent soft and melodic, carrying the warmth of her homeland and the wisdom of someone who understood that small gestures could change entire worlds. "A little girl's birthday deserves sweetness, no?" Ethan's cheeks flushed deep red with embarrassment, the heat spreading down his neck and under his collar. His free hand unconsciously went to the back of his neck, a nervous habit he developed in recent months whenever shame threatened to overwhelm him. The bakery suddenly felt too bright, too clean, too full of abundance that highlighted his own emptiness. "I appreciate that, ma'am, but I can't." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he cleared his throat, trying to maintain what little dignity he had left. "Nonsense." Maria waved her hand dismissively, the gesture both firm and gentle, already moving back behind the counter with the confidence of someone accustomed to overruling protests. Her apron strings swayed as she walked, and Ethan noticed the way she moved, not hurried, but with quiet determination. "How old is your daughter today?" "7," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He watched, transfixed, as Maria picked up the small vanilla cake he'd selected, the plainest, cheapest option in the case. In her hands, even that simple cake seemed to hold promise. 7K special. Maria's eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "Such a special age, when everything still feels like magic. Then we must add pink frosting, see? And sprinkles, yes?" She didn't wait for his answer, before reaching for a piping bag filled with rose-colored icing, the metal tip gleaming under the bakery's warm lights. "Please, you don't have to do this." Ethan shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, his weathered work boots, the only decent pair he owned, scuffing against the immaculate white tile floor. The bakery smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, fresh bread and butter, making his empty stomach ache with a hollow pain that reminded him he'd skipped breakfast again to save money. The scents wrapped around him like an embrace he didn't deserve. Maria's hands moved with practiced grace as she piped delicate swirls around the cake's edges, each movement precise yet flowing. Years of experience showed in the way she held the bag, the steady pressure she applied, the artistic flourishes that came as naturally as breathing. "In my family, we believe birthdays are sacred," she said, not looking up from her work. "They remind us that God gives us new chances every year, new mercies every morning." She glanced up at him then, her brown eyes holding depths of understanding that made Ethan's chest tighten. "You look like someone who could use a new chance, mijo." Ethan's throat constricted painfully. The simple observation, delivered without judgment or pity, hit him harder than any harsh words could have. "I'm between jobs right now," he admitted, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. He watched as she scattered rainbow sprinkles over the frosting with the careful attention of someone decorating a masterpiece. "Construction work. It's been difficult to find steady employment." The admission hung in the air between them. He didn't mention the false theft charges that followed him to every job interview, the way former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him, or the crushing weight of supporting Lily on unemployment benefits that barely covered their tiny apartment's rent. "Times are hard for many." Maria nodded, her expression understanding rather than pitying. There was something in her tone that suggested she, too, had known hardship, not recently perhaps, but intimately enough to recognize its marks on others. She picked up a pristine white cake box from a stack beneath the counter and carefully placed the now decorated treat inside, cushioning it with tissue paper. "But sometimes the smallest kindnesses make the biggest difference, no? Like drops of water eventually filling an empty well." "I'll pay you back," Ethan promised, his voice thick with emotion as his calloused hands carefully accepted the box. The cardboard felt substantial in his grasp, warm from the fresh cake within. "Once I find work, and I will find work, I'll come back and settle this debt." "No." Maria's tone was firm but gentle, like a mother correcting a beloved child. "Consider it a gift from Sweet Grace Bakery." She pressed a single pink birthday candle into his palm, her fingers briefly touching his. Her skin was warm and soft, despite the calluses from years of kneading dough and handling hot pans. Children grow so fast, like flowers reaching for the Sunday. Don't miss the joy of today worrying about tomorrow's storms. The bell above the door chimed melodiously as another customer entered, an elderly man in a pressed shirt who nodded respectfully at Maria. She gave Ethan one last warm smile, the kind that seemed to see straight through to his wounded soul and find it worthy of care, before turning to greet the new arrival. The gesture left him no chance to protest further, no opportunity to explain why he couldn't accept such generosity. "Buenos dias, Mr. Henderson. The usual today?" The walk home seemed lighter somehow, despite the familiar weight of worry that had settled permanently in his chest these past months. Ethan cradled the white bakery box against his body, as if it contained the most precious treasure imaginable. In a way, it did the treasure of unexpected kindness from a stranger, the promise of joy in his daughter's eyes, and something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The October morning air nipped at his cheeks as he walked the 4 blocks to their apartment building, a tired brick structure that had seen better decades. Other residents were heading to work, coffee cups in hand and purpose in their steps. Ethan tried not to feel the sting of being unemployed on a Thursday morning, instead focusing on the warmth radiating from the cake box. When he climbed the 2 flights of stairs and opened their apartment door, Lily was waiting in their tiny living room, still in her favorite star-covered pajamas, the ones that were getting too small but that she refused to outgrow. Her fine blonde hair was tousled from sleep, sticking up in impossible directions, and her blue eyes were bright with anticipation. Her gaze immediately locked onto the box in his hands, and her entire face transformed. "Is that? Happy birthday, sunshine." Ethan set the box reverently on their small kitchen table, the piece of furniture that served as dining room, homework desk, and craft station all in one. The table was scarred from years of use, but Lily had covered the worst spots with colorful drawings held down by magnets. Lily's squeal of delight filled their tiny apartment like music, bouncing off the thin walls and worn carpeting. "You got it. You really got it." She clapped her hands together, literally bouncing on her toes as she lifted the lid with the careful reverence of someone unwrapping a priceless artifact. "Pink and sparkles." Her voice rose to an octave that only pure joy could achieve. "Daddy, it's the prettiest cake in the whole wide world." Ethan's vision blurred as he watched her happiness so complete, so unguarded, so trusting that life would provide these small miracles. She had no idea how close they'd come to having no cake at all, no understanding of the kindness that had made this moment possible. In her world, Daddy always found a way, and that faith humbled him more than any charity could. He carefully pushed the single pink candle into the center of the cake, Maria's gift finding its perfect place among the swirls of frosting and scattered sprinkles. With hands that trembled slightly, he lit it with a match from their kitchen drawer, the tiny flame springing to life and casting a warm, golden glow across Lily's beaming face. "Make a wish, sweetheart. Make it a big one." Lily closed her eyes tight, her small face scrunched in intense concentration, her lips moving silently as she formulated her heart's deepest desire. Her hands were pressed together as if in prayer, and Ethan found himself holding his breath, as if the weight of her wish might somehow make it real. Then she leaned forward with the serious determination of someone entrusted with magic, and blew out the candle with a powerful puff that sent the flame dancing before extinguishing it completely. In that moment, watching his daughter's pure, unbridled joy illuminate their humble apartment more brightly than any lamp could, Ethan made his own silent vow. Somehow, some way, he would make their lives better. He would find work, rebuild their stability, and maybe, just maybe, become the kind of person who could pass along the kindness that Maria had shown them today. The cake might have cost just $5.75, but the hope it represented was priceless. The kitchen light flickered as Ethan gathered the paper plates and napkins from Lily's birthday celebration. Their small apartment felt warmer somehow, filled with the lingering scent of vanilla cake and the echo of his daughter's laughter. He smiled, remembering how her eyes had lit up at the pink frosting and colorful sprinkles. "Best birthday ever, Daddy," she had declared before he tucked her in, her voice heavy with sleep and sugar. The cake box sat on their worn counter, a simple white cardboard container with Sweet Grace Bakery printed in elegant blue script. Ethan ran his fingers over the logo, thinking about Maria's kindness. Such a small gesture, covering those missing cents, but it had meant everything today. As he lifted the box to fold it for recycling, something fluttered to the floor. Ethan frowned, bending down to pick up what looked like a carefully folded piece of paper. The note was written on cream-colored stationery, the handwriting elegant and purposeful. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. "You're not forgotten. Everyone deserves a fresh start." The words blurred before his eyes, and something else fell from the folded note. A crisp $100 bill, its green surface catching the dim kitchen light. Ethan stared at it in disbelief, his heart pounding. He picked up the money with shaking fingers, turning it over as if to verify it was real. "Oh my God," he whispered, sinking into one of their mismatched kitchen chairs. The wood creaked beneath him as he read the note again and again, trying to process what was happening. It had to be Maria. The kind baker must have slipped it into the box when she was adding the extra frosting and sprinkles. But why? They were strangers. She didn't know him anything. The generosity of it all made his chest tight with emotion. Ethan laid the money and note on the small kitchen table, running his hands over his face. Pride warred with desperation inside him. The old Ethan, the successful foreman who could provide for his family, would have returned it immediately. But now, that $100 meant groceries. For 2 weeks. It meant being able to pay the electric bill before they got another warning notice. The sound of Lily shifting in her sleep drew his attention to her bedroom door. Their apartment was small enough that he could hear her gentle breathing from where he Saturday. He thought about how brave she'd been through everything, losing her mother, moving to this tiny place, never complaining about the simple meals or worn clothes. Getting up from the chair, Ethan walked quietly to her room. The nightlight cast a soft glow over her sleeping face, peaceful and young. Her small hand rested on top of her covers, and he gently took it in his. Her fingers were warm and trusting, even in sleep. "Looks like God's still listening," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The words felt strange on his tongue. He hadn't talked to God much since Melissa died, since everything fell apart. But tonight, looking at his sleeping daughter and thinking of the unexpected kindness hidden in a simple cake box, something long dormant stirred in his heart. He carefully tucked Lily's hand back under her blanket and brushed a kiss across her forehead. Tomorrow, he would go back to Sweet Grace Bakery and thank Maria properly. For now, though, he just wanted to hold on to this moment of hope. Back in his own room, Ethan placed the note and money carefully in his wallet. He lay down on his bed, still fully dressed, and stared up at the water-stained ceiling. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't racing with worry about bills or job applications. Instead, he felt something that had been missing for so long: peace. The spring crickets chirped outside his window, a gentle lullaby. Ethan's breathing slowed, his muscles relaxing one by one. He didn't fight when his eyelids grew heavy, didn't try to stay awake planning how to make ends meet. Tonight, he simply let himself rest, carried into sleep by the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had seen him and cared enough to help. Morning sunlight warmed the cracked sidewalks of Willow Creek as Ethan walked Lily to school. His daughter skipped alongside him, her pink backpack bouncing with each step, still riding the high from yesterday's birthday celebration. "That was the best cake ever, Daddy," Lily said for the third time that morning. "The sprinkles were like tiny rainbows." Ethan squeezed her small hand, his heart full despite the weight of the mysterious note in his jacket pocket. "I'm glad you loved it, sweetheart." At the school entrance, Lily threw her arms around his waist. "See you after school," she waved before disappearing into the building with her classmates. Ethan watched until she was safely inside, then turned toward downtown. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Sweet Grace Bakery sat nestled between a hardware store and a bookshop, its blue awning fluttering in the breeze. Through the window, he could see Maria arranging fresh pastries in the display case. His fingers brushed against the folded note in his pocket. The gesture had touched him deeply, not just the money, but the message itself. "You're not forgotten." The words had repeated in his mind all night. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The familiar aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon wrapped around him like a warm blanket. "Good morning," Maria called out from behind the counter. She wore a flour-dusted apron, her dark hair tucked beneath a navy bandana. "How was the birthday celebration?" "It was perfect," Ethan said, approaching the counter. "Lily couldn't stop talking about the cake. I wanted to thank you properly for everything." Maria smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "It was nothing. Every child deserves a special birthday." Ethan pulled out the note and placed it on the counter. Including this? It means more than you know. Maria's eyebrows drew together as she picked up the note. Her eyes widened as she read it, then checked the amount on the bill. Oh, no, this wasn't me. She handed it back, shaking her head. I wish I could take credit, but I didn't put this in the box. But then who? Ethan's voice trailed off as confusion crossed his face. Maria glanced around the empty bakery, then leaned forward slightly. Maybe it was her, she said softly, a knowing look in her eyes. Her? Grace Montgomery. She's my silent partner in the bakery. Maria began organizing receipt papers, her movements precise and practiced. She owns half the buildings downtown, including this one, but most people never see her. Ethan's mind raced. He'd heard the name before, whispers around town about the wealthy widow who lived in the old Victorian mansion on Hill Street. Why would she help me? Maria's eyes softened. Because that's what she does. Sometimes there'll be an envelope left for someone who's struggling. A single mother who can't make rent, a veteran who needs help with medical bills. She shrugged. She never wants credit or thanks. Just helps quietly, in her own way. The bell chimed as customers entered the bakery. Maria straightened up, her voice returning to its normal volume. The morning rush is starting. Will you excuse me? Ethan nodded, stepping aside as people lined up for coffee and breakfast pastries. He made his way to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Thank you again, Maria, for everything. Outside, Ethan stood on the sidewalk, looking across the street at the imposing brick building that housed Grace Montgomery's offices. Its Victorian architecture spoke of old money and tradition, with tall windows and ornate stonework. The brass nameplate beside the entrance read Montgomery Properties in elegant script. The note felt heavier in his pocket now. Someone had seen him, really seen him, when he felt invisible to the world. Not with pity, but with understanding, with grace, he whispered into the morning air. Then I'll thank her myself. The traffic light changed, sending cars rushing past on Main Street. A delivery truck rattled by, momentarily blocking his view of the Montgomery building. When it passed, Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on those gleaming windows, wondering about the mysterious woman who had reached out to help a stranger in need. The marble lobby of Montgomery Enterprises gleamed under crystal chandeliers, making Ethan feel even more out of place in his worn work boots and faded jacket. The $100 bill and note weighed heavy in his pocket as he approached the curved reception desk, where a professionally dressed woman typed at her computer. She looked up, her expression neutral but questioning. Can I help you? Yes, ma'am, Ethan said, clearing his throat. I'd like to see Mrs. Grace Montgomery, please. The receptionist's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. Do you have an appointment? No, but Ethan pulled out the folded note. I need to thank her for something important. I'm sorry, sir, she said, her tone polite but firm. Mrs. Montgomery doesn't take walk-ins. You'll need to schedule an appointment through proper channels. Could you at least tell her Ethan Miller is here? It's about Sweet Grace Bakery. The receptionist's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. I apologize, but Mrs. Montgomery's schedule is completely full today. You can leave a message, or I can give you her assistance card. No, that's all right. Ethan stepped back, shoulders slumping. Thank you for your time. Outside, the morning had grown warmer. Ethan sat on a bench across from the building's entrance, watching people stream in and out of the revolving doors. Business suits, designer briefcases, important-looking people with phones pressed to their ears. He felt invisible among them, just another shadow on the sidewalk. An hour passed. Ethan knew he should be looking for work, but something kept him rooted to that spot. He watched a delivery man bring flowers, a group of executives head out for lunch, a mailman pushing his cart. Then, shortly after noon, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door. A nurse in crisp white scrubs emerged first, her movements efficient and practiced. She reached back into the car, helping someone else. Ethan sat up straighter. A silver-haired woman in a wheelchair appeared, guided by the nurse's steady hands. Despite her seated position, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Her cream-colored suit looked expensive but not flashy, and a string of pearls graced her neck. But what struck Ethan most was her face, lined with age, yet remarkably kind, with eyes that seemed to hold both wisdom and warmth. This had to be Grace Montgomery. The nurse wheeled her toward the building's entrance, speaking softly to her charge. Mrs. Montgomery nodded at whatever was being said, then paused to smile at the doorman who hurried to hold the door open. Even from across the street, Ethan could see how the man's face lit up at her acknowledgement. Ethan stood, his hand automatically reaching for the note in his pocket. This was his chance to thank her, to tell her how much that small act of kindness had meant to him and Lily. He took 2 steps forward, then stopped. Through the building's glass front, he could see Mrs. Montgomery being wheeled toward the elevator. She looked more fragile up close, her hands clasped carefully in her lap, the nurse hovering protectively nearby. The weight of her generosity struck him anew. This woman, despite her own challenges, had taken the time to help a stranger. Ethan's feet remained rooted to the spot. What right did he have to disturb her day, to burden her with his gratitude when she clearly had her own struggles? The note had been anonymous for a reason. No, he thought, watching as the elevator doors closed on Mrs. Montgomery and her nurse. If he wanted to thank her properly, it wouldn't be with just words. He would show her through actions that her faith in him wasn't misplaced. He turned away from the building, his mind already forming plans. The bakery needed repairs. He'd seen the loose hinges on the front door, the crack in the display window. He could fix those things. He could prove himself worthy of the second chance she'd given him. Ethan touched the note one last time through his jacket pocket, then headed down the street toward Sweet Grace Bakery. The morning's defeat had transformed into something else: determination. That night, in the dim light of a single bulb hanging over his scratched kitchen table, Ethan Miller sat hunched forward, shifting his gaze between 2 pieces of paper. In his right hand, he held the mysterious note that had changed everything. In his left, a wrinkled job application for Sweet Grace Bakery that he'd picked up earlier that day. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the ancient refrigerator and Lily's gentle breathing from the next room. The walls needed fresh paint, and the linoleum floor had seen better days. But tonight, something felt different. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, had found its way into their modest home. Ethan smoothed out the application on the table, careful not to tear the worn paper. His handwriting felt stiff and awkward. It had been months since he'd filled out anything more complicated than a grocery list, but he took his time, making sure each letter was clear and neat. Under skills and experience, he paused, then wrote, 15 years in construction, certified foreman, experienced in all aspects of building maintenance and repair. His hand trembled slightly as he added, references available upon request. He knew his old references might not want to speak for him anymore, but he had to try. The sound of small feet padding across the floor made him look up. Lily stood in her worn pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Daddy, I'm thirsty. Ethan pushed back his chair and went to get her a glass of water. As she sipped, he studied her face, so much like her mother's. Hey, sunshine, he said softly. How about we have some dinner? He opened the cupboard, grateful for the groceries the $100 had bought. Real food, not just beans and bread. He made them both grilled cheese sandwiches, cutting Lily's into triangles the way she liked. As they ate, Lily pointed to the application. What's that, Daddy? That's a job application, sweetheart. He reached across the table and squeezed her small hand. For the bakery where we got your birthday cake. Remember Maria? Lily's face lit up. The nice lady with the sprinkles? That's right. Ethan smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. I'm gonna help fix things there. Make sure everything works right. Like you used to do at the big buildings? Something like that. He took a deep breath, looking into her trusting eyes. We're going to be okay. Daddy's got a plan. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Sweet Grace Bakery just as Maria was unlocking the front door. The early morning air was crisp, and the scent of fresh bread already wafted from the kitchen's vents. Buenos dias, Maria greeted him, surprised but smiling. She wore a flour-dusted apron, her dark hair tied back neatly. Good morning, Mrs. Alvarez. Ethan held out the application. I noticed yesterday that your back door hinge was loose, and I heard the sink dripping. I can fix those things. I'm good with my hands, and I'd work hard. Maria took the application, studying it carefully. Her eyes softened as she read. You were a foreman? Yes, ma'am, before. He trailed off, not wanting to explain about the false accusations, the lost job, the spiral that had followed. Maria nodded, seeming to understand what he couldn't say. She glanced around her bakery. At the worn floorboards, the temperamental espresso machine, the window that stuck halfway up. Part-time to start, she said finally. Mornings, after the breakfast rush. Can you begin today? Relief flooded through Ethan. Yes, ma'am. I have my tools in my truck. For the next few hours, Ethan lost himself in honest work. He tightened the door hinge, fixed the leaky sink, and even managed to repair the stubborn window. Each task completed felt like another small step toward redemption. When the lunch crowd thinned, Maria brought him a sandwich and coffee. "On the house," she said firmly when he reached for his wallet. "You've already earned it." As the afternoon sun began to sink, Ethan gathered his tools. His muscles ached pleasantly from the work, and his mind felt clearer than it had in months. Maria handed him an envelope with his first day's pay. "Cash. Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for giving me a chance." Ethan walked home under a sky painted in shades of pink and gold. The spring air felt fresh in his lungs, and for the first time in years, he felt something solid beneath his feet. Not just pavement, but purpose. Across town, in her top-floor office at Montgomery Enterprises, Grace Montgomery sat in her wheelchair by the window. The last light of day illuminated her elegant profile as she watched a familiar figure walking down the street below. Her aged hands rested lightly on the armrests as she leaned forward slightly. "He looks just like the man who saved us that night," she murmured, her voice soft with memory. The morning sun cast long shadows through the bakery's front windows as Ethan arrived for his first day of work. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, carrying his old toolbox, its red paint chipped and faded from years of faithful service. The familiar scent of fresh bread and vanilla wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Maria Alvarez stood behind the counter, her dark hair neatly tucked beneath a white baker's cap. She was humming a gentle Spanish hymn while arranging pastries in the display case. The melody, though unfamiliar to Ethan, carried a peace that made his shoulders relax. "Buenos dias, Ethan," Maria greeted him with a bright smile. "Ready for the grand tour?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, straightening his worn work shirt. "Just point me where you need me." Maria wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and gestured for him to follow. "First, let me show you the problem spots." Her voice carried the warmth of morning coffee as she guided him through the cozy space. The bakery was bigger than it appeared from outside. Behind the cheerful front room with its displays of cookies and cakes lay a maze of practical spaces. Maria pointed out loose hinges on cabinet doors, a temperamental sink in the back kitchen, and windows that stuck halfway up. "That drain's been slow for months," she said, pointing to the kitchen sink, "and the overhead fan makes a clicking sound that drives me loco." Ethan nodded, mentally cataloging each item. This was familiar territory, the kind of work that had once filled his days as a construction foreman. His hands almost itched to get started. He began with the simplest tasks first. The quiet rhythm of work filled his morning, tightening bolts here, adjusting hinges there. The methodical nature of repair work always calmed his mind. Each fixed item felt like setting something right in the world. As the morning rush began, the bell above the door chimed more frequently. Customers filtered in and out, their conversations creating a pleasant backdrop to his work. He could hear Maria greeting each one by name, asking about their families or jobs. "Who's the new handyman?" he heard more than one person ask. "That's Ethan," Maria would reply, her voice carrying pride as if he were family. "He's helping make Sweet Grace even sweeter." From his spot under the sink, Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the physical labor. It had been so long since he'd felt part of something, since he'd heard his name spoken with respect rather than pity. By early afternoon, he'd cleared the slow drain, fixed 3 cabinet doors, and adjusted the ceiling fan until it hummed smoothly. Each completed task earned him a bright smile from Maria and appreciative nods from customers. "The sink hasn't drained this well in years," Maria exclaimed, testing his handiwork. "You have magic hands, Ethan." He ducked his head, unused to praise. "Just doing my job, Mrs. Alvarez." "Maria?" she corrected gently. "We're family here at Sweet Grace." As the afternoon light began to soften, Ethan tackled the old wooden sign hanging above the front door. Its letters were fading, and one corner had come loose. Standing on his ladder, he carefully reinforced the mounting brackets and touched up the paint where it had chipped away. "Sweet Grace, where kindness is baked in," the sign proclaimed in elegant script. As he worked, he pondered the name, wondering about the mysterious Grace Montgomery, who had somehow known he needed help. The evening crowd thinned out, leaving only the occasional customer stopping for bread on their way home. Ethan could hear snippets of conversation as people passed beneath his ladder. "Look at that sign, shining like new. Did you see how he fixed that wobbly table earlier?" Maria finally found someone to help with the repairs. Each comment made him stand a little straighter, work a little more carefully. It had been so long since he'd felt useful, since his work had made a visible difference in people's lives. As he was packing up his tools, Maria appeared with a paper bag that released wisps of warm, yeasty fragrance. Fresh sourdough, she said, pressing it into his hands. Still warm from the oven. A little thank you for all your hard work today. Mrs. Alvarez, Maria, you don't have to— Shush! She cut him off with a gentle smile. Good work deserves good bread. That's the rule at Sweet Grace. Ethan clutched the warm loaf to his chest, remembering how his mother used to say that bread was love made edible. Thank you, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Same time tomorrow? Maria asked, already knowing his answer. Yes, ma'am, I'll be here. As Ethan locked the front door, testing it twice out of habit, he noticed a sleek black car pull up across the street. The tinted windows reflected the sunset, making it impossible to see inside. But he could feel eyes watching him from within the shadowy interior. The morning sun filtered through the bakery windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn wooden floor. Ethan had arrived early, eager to start another day of repairs. As he made his way behind the counter to check the faulty sink pipe, something caught his eye. A crisp white envelope propped against the cash register. His name was written on it in elegant cursive handwriting. With slightly trembling fingers, he opened it and pulled out a small note card that read, Meet me at Willow Park at noon. G.M. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Grace Montgomery, the mysterious benefactor he'd been wondering about for days. He checked his watch. 8:30 a.m. The next few hours crawled by as he tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting to the upcoming meeting. He replaced washers, tightened loose cabinet hinges, and fixed a squeaky oven door, all while glancing at the clock every few minutes. Maria noticed his distraction, but didn't comment, only offering him a knowing smile as she went about her baking. At 11:45, Ethan cleaned up his tools and changed into the spare shirt he kept in his truck. Willow Park was just 2 blocks away, a peaceful spot in the heart of town with ancient weeping willows and well-maintained flower beds. As he walked through the wrought iron gates, his work boots crunching on the gravel path, Ethan spotted her immediately. Grace Montgomery sat in her wheelchair near the central fountain, surrounded by pigeons and sparrows. She wore a pale blue cardigan and pearl earrings that caught the midday light. Despite her wheelchair, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. She was tossing breadcrumbs to the birds, her movements deliberate and graceful. As Ethan approached, she looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that made her entire face light up and erased years from her appearance. Mr. Miller, she said warmly, her voice rich and clear. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Montgomery, Ethan replied, suddenly aware of his calloused hands and worn jeans. I've been hoping to thank you properly. Grace gestured to the wooden bench beside her wheelchair. Please, sit with me a moment. Ethan settled onto the bench, noticing how the willow branches swayed gently above them, creating shifting patterns of shade and sunlight. A few birds hopped closer, eyeing the remaining breadcrumbs in Grace's lap. Do you remember a stormy night about 8 years ago, she asked, scattering more crumbs for the waiting birds? On Highway 43 just outside of town? Ethan's brow furrowed in concentration. I'm not sure. A black Lincoln Continental with a flat tire, she continued. An older gentleman and his wife, stranded in the rain. Recognition dawned on Ethan's face. Yes, I remember now. The man's jacket was soaked through because he'd been trying to change the tire himself. Grace's eyes glistened. That was my Henry, my husband. She paused, watching a particularly bold sparrow hop closer. You pulled over without hesitation, changed our tire in that horrible downpour, refused to take any payment, and even followed us to make sure we made it to town safely. Ethan remembered that night. The sheets of rain, the elderly couple's worried faces, the gentleman insisting on at least paying him for his trouble. He'd refused any money, saying it was just the right thing to do. Henry never forgot that kindness. Grace continued, her voice soft with memory. He would tell that story at dinner parties, about the young construction worker who stopped to help when dozens of other cars just passed by. She turned to face him directly, her eyes kind but intense. When I saw you in my bakery that day, buying a birthday cake for your little girl, I knew immediately who you were. The same good heart, the same quiet dignity, even in difficult times. Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes. He blinked hard, trying to maintain his composure. The note in the cake box. The $100. Yes, Grace acknowledged simply. That was me, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Mrs. Montgomery, I don't know how to repay. She held up her hand, stopping in mid-sentence. Don't repay me. Just live a life that proves kindness still matters. Her voice carried the weight of wisdom earned through years of watching the world change. That's all any of us can really do. Keep the light of compassion burning, one small act at a time. Ethan sat there, fighting back tears. overwhelmed by the realization that a simple act of kindness he'd nearly forgotten had come full circle to help him when he needed it most. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as Grace Montgomery's nurse wheeled her inside. The morning regulars paused mid-bite, watching the elegant woman in her pressed navy blazer and pearl necklace. Her silver hair caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, creating a gentle halo effect. Maria rushed from behind the counter, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Mrs. Montgomery, what a wonderful surprise!" Her warm smile lit up the entire shop. Ethan looked up from where he was fixing a loose cabinet hinge, his tool belt hanging low on his hips. He quickly stood, attempting to straighten his work shirt. Grace's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Maria, your scones smell divine as always," she turned to Ethan. "And Mr. Miller, I see you're keeping busy." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied, clearing his throat. "Just trying to make things right, one repair at a time." Grace gestured for her nurse to wheel her closer to where Ethan stood. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you." She pulled a manila folder from her leather bag. "I own several rental properties in town, small homes mostly. They've been somewhat neglected since my husband passed. I need someone with both skill and integrity to oversee their restoration." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Mrs. Montgomery, the pay is fair," she continued, opening the folder. "Healthcare benefits included. And I trust you'll treat these homes as if families depend on them, because they do." Maria squeezed Ethan's shoulder. "He's the best man for the job, Grace. You won't find anyone more careful or honest." Ethan carefully reviewed the contract Grace presented. The salary was more than generous, enough to give Lily the life she deserved. His hands trembled slightly as he signed his name. "Thank you," he said softly. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Grace replied with quiet certainty. The changes came gradually but steadily over the next few weeks. Ethan's first paycheck meant new shoes for Lily, bright purple sneakers with actual support, not the worn-out hand-me-downs she'd been wearing. Her face lit up when she tried them on, bouncing around their small apartment. "Look, Daddy, I can run so fast now." The second paycheck caught up their overdue rent. Their landlord even smiled at them in the hallway for the first time in months. Ethan started sleeping better, the crushing weight of constant worry finally lifting from his chest. On Sundays, they returned to church. Ethan had avoided it for so long, ashamed of having nothing to put in the collection plate. Now he helped repair the playground equipment during their monthly volunteer day. Lily would watch him work, proudly telling anyone who would listen, "That's my daddy. He fixes everything." One afternoon, Lily's teacher, Miss Thompson, pulled Ethan aside during pickup. "I thought you'd like to see this," she said, holding up Lily's latest drawing. It showed a stick figure man surrounded by houses, tools, and smiling faces. At the top, in wobbly letters, it read, "My daddy fixes things for nice people." "She told the whole class about your new job," Miss Thompson continued. "She said you make broken houses happy again." That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Ethan sat at their small kitchen table. He opened a new notebook, running his hand over its clean pages. At the top of the first page, he wrote, "Things I'll fix next." The list began with practical items. Mrs. Jensen's leaky roof, the Williams family's furnace, the broken steps at the Rodriguez house. But as he continued writing, the entry shifted. "Help Tom at church believe in second chances. Show kids at the playground that good men still exist. Prove that broken people can become whole again." Ethan looked at his daughter's drawing, now proudly displayed on their refrigerator. The stick figure man stood tall and strong, surrounded by all the lives he could touch. He thought about Grace's words at their first meeting in the park. "Don't repay me. Just live a life that proves kindness still matters." He was finally beginning to understand what she meant. Each repair wasn't just about fixing things. It was about restoring faith, one small act at a time. The autumn morning started crisp and bright as Ethan worked on the Henderson house, one of Grace's rental properties that needed significant repairs. His tool belt clinked against the porch railing as he replaced rotting boards with fresh lumber. The satisfying thud of his hammer echoed through the quiet neighborhood street. Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher, brought him a glass of lemonade. "You're doing beautiful work, Mr. Miller," she said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "This old place hasn't looked this good in years." "Thank you, ma'am," Ethan replied, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Just trying to do right by Mrs. Montgomery's trust in me." As he worked, more neighbors stopped to watch. Some offered friendly waves, while others huddled in small groups, their whispers carrying on the breeze. Ethan tried to focus on his task, but fragments of conversation drifted his way. "Isn't that the Miller fellow who used to work for Davidson Construction? The one who got fired for stealing supplies? Can't believe Grace Montgomery hired him." Ethan's hammer missed its mark, nearly catching his thumb. The old accusations hit him like physical blows. He remembered that horrible day 3 years ago when the police had shown up at the construction site. Someone had been stealing supplies for months, and false evidence pointed to him. Though he was later cleared, the damage to his reputation had been done. At lunchtime, he walked to Sweet Grace Bakery, hoping Maria's warmth would lift his spirits. The bell chimed as he entered, and the familiar scent of fresh bread wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. "Ethan, perfect timing," Maria called out. "I just pulled these rolls from the oven." But before he could reach the counter, a gruff voice cut through the bakery's peaceful atmosphere. "I wouldn't trust him with my property." The speaker was Ronald Watson, one of the wealthier residents in town. He stood with 2 other men, coffee cups in hand. "Once a thief, always a thief." The words hung in the air like poison. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others staring openly at Ethan. His face burned with shame and anger, but years of practice had taught him to keep his emotions tightly controlled. Maria's reaction was immediate and fierce. She emerged from behind the counter, her small frame somehow filling the entire space. "Mr. Watson," she said, her accent thickening with emotion, "in my bakery, we serve kindness with our coffee. If you can't manage that, perhaps you should find your morning coffee elsewhere." "Now, Maria," Watson began, but she cut him off. "No, I know Ethan Miller. I see him work honest hours with honest hands. I see him sacrifice everything for his little girl." Her dark eyes flashed. "What do you do, Mr. Watson, besides count your money and judge others?" The bakery fell silent. Watson's face reddened, but before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation, soft but commanding. "I believe Maria has made her point quite clear." Grace Montgomery sat in her wheelchair near the door, having entered unnoticed during the confrontation. Her nurse stood behind her, but Grace's presence needed no support to command attention. "Grace," Watson stammered, "I was just expressing concern about matters that were resolved years ago," Grace interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Miller was cleared of all charges, as you well know, Ronald. And since then, he has proven himself to be exactly the kind of person this town needs more of. Someone who rebuilds, rather than tears down." She wheeled herself closer to Ethan, who stood rooted to the spot. "Don't let the small minds of others define your worth, Ethan. Your actions speak far louder than their whispers ever could." Watson and his companions quickly paid their bills and left. Other customers gradually returned to their conversations, though many shot sympathetic glances in Ethan's direction. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly to Maria and Grace. "I don't want to cause trouble for your business." Maria scoffed, pressing a paper bag of fresh rolls into his hands. "You cause no trouble. They cause trouble with their stupid gossip." "Maria's right," Grace added. "The only opinion that matters is the one you see in your daughter's eyes when she looks at you." Ethan's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak, and headed back to work. The afternoon passed slowly, each swing of his hammer carrying the weight of the morning's confrontation. By the time he finished his workday, his shoulders ached not just from physical labor, but from carrying the burden of others' judgment. Walking home, he passed the park where he and Lily often played. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, reminding him of his daughter's favorite colors. Despite the heaviness in his heart, he knew he needed to leave the day's pain outside their apartment door. When he walked in, Lily bounded up to him, her backpack still on, artwork clutched in her hand. "Daddy, I drew our family today. Want to have hot cocoa and see it?" "That sounds perfect, sunshine," he said, managing a genuine smile. He hung up his jacket and went to the kitchen, where he heated milk in their dented pot. The familiar routine of making hot cocoa, stirring in the powder, adding a tiny pinch of cinnamon like her mother used to do, helped steady his hands and calm his mind. They sat at their small kitchen table, Lily chattering about her day while marshmallows slowly melted in their mugs. She spread out her drawing, a colorful scene of them at the park, stick figures with enormous smiles. "And see, Daddy, I drew you extra tall because you're the strongest daddy ever." Ethan's laughter mixed with hers, genuine and warm, pushing away the darkness of the day's events. In that moment, sharing hot cocoa with his daughter, he realized Grace was right. The only opinions that truly mattered were right here in this small apartment, wrapped in the love of a little girl who saw him exactly as he was, her hero. Saturday morning painted Willow Creek in soft golden light. Ethan's old pickup truck rattled down the gravel road leading to Grace's farmhouse, with Lily bouncing excitedly in the passenger seat. The weathered two-story home sat on 5 acres of land, its white paint peeling and shutters hanging crooked, but its bones were solid, just like Ethan's determination. "Look, Daddy, flowers!" Lily pressed her face against the window, pointing at patches of wildflowers dotting the overgrown lawn. Her enthusiasm made Ethan smile, despite the weight of yesterday's whispers still heavy on his mind. "Want to be my assistant gardener today, sweetie?" he asked, parking near the wraparound porch. "Can I pick some flowers for Miss Grace?" Lily's eyes sparkled with possibility. "I think she'd love that." Ethan helped her out of the truck, watching as she skipped toward a cluster of purple and yellow blooms. He unloaded his tools and surveyed the work ahead. The farmhouse had good bones, but needed love. Loose boards on the porch, gutters hanging askew, windows that wouldn't quite shut. It reminded him of himself in a way. Damaged, but not beyond repair. As Ethan worked on replacing rotted porch boards, Lily's voice carried across the yard in little songs she made up about flowers and butterflies. The sound soothed him, made the work feel lighter somehow. She'd created a small bouquet, arranging it carefully on the porch steps. Around mid-morning, the distinct crunch of tires on gravel announced Grace's arrival. Her chauffeur, Thomas, carefully helped her from the car into her wheelchair. Despite her physical frailty, Grace's presence carried a quiet strength that always made Ethan stand a little straighter. "Well, what do we have here?" Grace's eyes crinkled with delight as Lily ran up to her wheelchair, wildflower bouquet extended. "I picked these for you, Miss Grace. The purple ones are called, wild asters," Grace supplied, accepting the flowers with genuine joy. "They were my Robert's favorites. He used to say they were tough little things, blooming even when everything else had given up." Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and approached. "Ma'am, I've replaced most of the bad boards on the east side of the porch. The support beams are solid, just needed some surface work." Grace nodded, but her attention was on Lily, who was now showing her a caterpillar she'd found. "Thomas," she called to her chauffeur, "would you mind getting the picnic basket from the car? I thought we might all take lunch together." Soon they were settled on the newly repaired portion of the porch, sharing sandwiches and lemonade. Lily sat cross-legged on a blanket, carefully eating around her crusts while telling Grace about school. "You know," Grace said during a lull in conversation, "Robert and I bought this place 40 years ago, had big dreams for it." She gazed out at the overgrown fields, but her eyes seemed to see something else entirely. He wanted to turn it into a haven for families who needed a fresh start. Reasonable rent, help with job placement, a community garden where everyone could contribute. Ethan listened intently, recognizing the weight of shared dreams in her voice. "What happened?" "Life, mostly. Robert's health declined, and managing our other properties took precedence. But sometimes..." She paused, watching Lily chase a butterfly across the yard. "Sometimes I think dreams don't die. They just wait for the right person to pick them up again." The suggestion in her words made Ethan's heart beat faster, but he stayed quiet, letting her continue. "Robert would have liked you, Ethan. He believed in second chances because he needed one himself once. Did you know he was a recovered alcoholic? Lost everything in his 20s before turning his life around." "I didn't know that," Ethan said softly. He used to say that grace wasn't just a beautiful word. It was the force that holds broken people together until they can stand on their own again. She smoothed the blanket over her lap. "That's why we named the bakery Sweet Grace. Not after me, but after the thing that saved us both." Lily returned then, breathless and happy, holding another flower. "Look what I found, Daddy. It was growing all alone by the fence." "That's a black-eyed Susan," Grace explained. "They're very resilient flowers. They spread their seeds and create whole gardens from just one bloom." They spent the afternoon sharing more stories. Grace told them about raising her own daughter, now living in California. Ethan spoke about Melissa, surprised by how the memories brought more warmth than pain now. Lily dozed in the autumn sunshine, her head resting against Grace's wheelchair. "You know," Grace said thoughtfully, "this place has been waiting for someone who understands both broken things and beautiful ones." She gestured to the house, to the wild gardens, to the peaceful scene before them. Maybe that dream isn't lost yet. As the sun began its descent, painting the old farmhouse in shades of amber and rose, Ethan gathered their picnic things and helped Thomas get Grace back to the car. Lily hugged her goodbye, then ran to the truck to get her jacket. Ethan stood for a moment, looking at the farmhouse. The replaced boards gleamed lighter than their weathered neighbors. New glass sparkled in previously broken windows. Wildflowers nodded in the evening breeze. In that moment, with the golden light warming its walls, the old house seemed to pulse with possibility. Maybe I'm part of something sacred, he thought, feeling the weight and wonder of it settle in his chest. The morning sun streamed through the bakery's front windows, casting warm patterns across the freshly swept floor. Ethan wiped down the counter, his movements careful and methodical. The bell above the door chimed, and a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped inside. His polished shoes clicked against the tiles as he approached the counter. "Richard Doyle," the man announced, extending a manicured hand that Ethan hesitantly shook. "I'm here to see Grace Montgomery." Maria emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. Her usually warm expression cooled at the sight of their visitor. "Mrs. Montgomery is in her office upstairs." As if on cue, the slow whir of Grace's wheelchair descended the ramp they'd installed last month. She appeared, elegant as always, in her pearl gray sweater, her silver hair neatly styled. "Richard," Grace said, her voice firm but pleasant. "To what do we owe this visit?" Doyle's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a business proposition, Grace. One I think you'll find quite profitable." He pulled out a leather portfolio, removing glossy architectural renderings. "Imagine this whole block transformed into a modern shopping complex. Your property's value would triple." Grace studied the drawings without expression. "And what happens to my tenants? The families who've lived here for generations?" "Progress requires sacrifice," Doyle said smoothly. "I'm prepared to offer well above market value. These buildings aren't just investments, Richard. They're homes, communities." Grace's wheelchair moved closer to Ethan. "And this bakery is staying exactly as it is." Doyle's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. "You'll change your mind," he said, gathering his papers. "They always do." His gaze lingered on Ethan, calculating and sharp. Over the next few days, things began to change. Ethan noticed people watching him differently. Whispers followed him down the street. At the hardware store, the owner who'd always been friendly now counted his change twice. Then the flyers appeared. They were everywhere. Taped to telephone poles, stuffed in mailboxes, left on windshields. Black text on cheap paper screamed accusations. "Convicted thief exploiting local widow," and "Who's really spending Grace Montgomery's money?" Maria tore down every flyer she found near the bakery, her hands shaking with anger. "This is Richard Doyle's doing," she said. "He's trying to pressure Grace by destroying you." Ethan tried to keep working, to hold his head high. But each morning brought new whispers, new accusations. The regular customers who used to greet him warmly now hurried past with averted eyes. "Did you see how much work he's doing on her properties?" One woman stage whispered to another. "Probably padding the bills, taking advantage of that poor woman's kindness." "I heard he was fired from his last job for stealing," another replied. Some people never change. Grace insisted the rumors would pass, but Ethan saw the toll it was taking on her. Her face grew more tired, her shoulders heavier. She'd built a lifetime of trust in this community, and now people questioned her judgment because of him. One afternoon, Ethan overheard two contractors refusing to work with him. "Can't risk our reputation," they said. The hardware store owner started requiring payment up front, no more store credit for supplies. The final blow came when he picked Lily up from school. Her teacher pulled him aside, explaining gently that some parents had expressed concerns about their children playing with Lily. His daughter's small face crumpled as her best friend's mother hurried her away without a word. They walked home through the late afternoon shadows, past groups of townspeople who fell silent as they approached. Lily's small hand gripped his tightly, her steps uncertain. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, worried. "Did you do something bad?" Ethan stopped walking, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. He knelt down to her level, seeing the confusion and fear in her innocent eyes. The same eyes that had always looked at him with complete trust, now clouded with doubt planted by others' cruelty. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes people believe lies because it's easier than believing in second chances? How could he help her understand that the world isn't always fair, even when you're trying your hardest to do what's right? The afternoon meeting at Sweet Grace Bakery had started like any other. Grace Montgomery sat in her wheelchair at the head of the small table, her silver hair neatly pinned back, reviewing renovation plans with Ethan. Maria busied herself nearby, pulling fresh bread from the ovens. "These homes," Grace said, spreading out old blueprints, "they need more than just repairs. They need— She stopped mid-sentence, her hand clutching her chest. The papers scattered across the floor. Mrs. Montgomery? Ethan rushed to her side. Her face had gone pale, her breathing shallow and labored. Maria! Call 911! Maria dropped her oven mitts and ran for the phone. Grace's eyes were wide with fear as she gripped Ethan's arm. Can't breathe, she whispered. Help is coming, Ethan assured her, holding her hand. Stay with us. He could feel her pulse racing beneath his fingers. The seconds crawled by like hours until sirens wailed in the distance. The paramedics burst through the bakery door, their equipment clattering against the tile floor. Possible cardiac event? One called out as they lifted Grace onto the stretcher. BP's elevated, pulse irregular. I'm going with her, Ethan told Maria, already following the paramedics out. I'll close up and meet you there, Maria called after him, making the sign of the cross. In the ambulance, Grace seemed so small under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ethan held her hand while the paramedics worked, attaching monitors and starting an IV. You'll be okay, he kept saying, more to himself than to her. At the hospital, they whisked Grace away through double doors, marked emergency personnel only. Ethan paced the waiting room, his work boots leaving scuff marks on the linoleum. Hours passed. Coffee grew cold in styrofoam cups. Maria arrived with sandwiches that no one ate. Finally, a doctor emerged. Mrs. Montgomery had a mild heart attack, he explained. We've stabilized her condition, but she'll need to remain here for observation. Relief flooded through Ethan, but it was short-lived. The next morning, Richard Doyle strode into the town council meeting, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the wood-paneled walls. It's come to my attention, he announced, his voice dripping with false concern, that Grace Montgomery's property management has fallen into questionable hands. He produced a thick folder. I have here documentation of Mr. Miller's criminal record. The council members leafed through the papers, murmuring among themselves. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched from the back row. Given Mrs. Montgomery's current medical condition, Richard continued, I moved to temporarily freeze all her ongoing projects until a full investigation can be conducted. The vote was quick and devastating. 7 hands raised in favor, 2 against. By noon, word had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Ethan's phone buzzed with cancellations from other clients. The hardware store owner who'd been friendly just yesterday now watched him suspiciously from behind the counter. At the bakery, Maria stood firm. This is nonsense, she declared, slamming a pan onto the counter. Everyone knows you're innocent, but not everyone did. Parents pulled their children closer when Ethan walked by. The bank manager suggested he'd delay his loan application. Even the elderly couple whose porch he'd fixed last week crossed the street to avoid him. A few loyal friends remained. Pastor Jim stopped by with groceries for Lily. The librarian who'd helped Ethan study for his contractor's license wrote a letter to the editor defending his character, but their voices seemed small against the tide of whispers and accusations. 3 days after Grace's heart attack, heavy clouds rolled in from the west. Ethan sat on a bench outside the hospital, rain soaking through his worn jacket. He'd just tried to visit Grace, but the nurse said she was resting and couldn't have visitors. Through the hospital windows, he could see Richard Doyle leaving Grace's room, briefcase in hand, wearing a satisfied smile. The developer caught Ethan's eye and gave a small, mocking wave. Water dripped from Ethan's hair into his eyes, mixing with tears he couldn't hold back anymore. His shoulders shook as he gripped his soaked jacket. I tried, Lord, he whispered into the rain. I really tried. The manila envelope slid under Ethan's apartment door like a death sentence. He stared at it for several minutes before his trembling fingers picked it up. The official letterhead and legal jargon all boiled down to 3 cruel words. Notice of eviction. Lily sat cross-legged on their worn carpet, coloring a picture of what looked like angels. She glanced up at her father's face and her crayon stopped mid-stroke. Daddy? Are you okay? Ethan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sure, sunshine. He swallowed hard. We need to pack some things up, that's all. They worked in silence, gathering their modest belongings into cardboard boxes scrounged from behind the grocery store. Lily carefully wrapped her few treasures in old newspaper, the ceramic angel her mother had given her, a handful of precious books, the cake box from her birthday that she refused to throw away. Ethan's movements were mechanical as he folded their clothes, each shirt and sock a reminder of how little they had to pack. A gentle knock at the door made them both jump. Maria Alvarez stood in the hallway, holding a large pot that filled the air with the aroma of chicken soup. Her dark eyes were warm with concern. "You need to eat," she said firmly, bustling past Ethan into their half-packed kitchen. "Both of you." "Maria, you don't have to," Ethan began. "Hush." She began pulling bowls from a box they'd just packed. "Food first, then we talk." The soup was rich and comforting, filled with vegetables and tiny pasta stars that made Lily smile for the first time that day. Maria sat with them at their wobbly card table, the last piece of furniture they hadn't packed. "Where will we go?" Lily asked suddenly. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Ethan's heart clenched. Before he could answer, Maria reached across and squeezed his hand. "God never closes a door without opening a window, mi amor. You're not alone in this." "The whole town thinks I'm a thief," Ethan said quietly, his voice rough. "Nobody will rent to me now." "Not the whole town," Maria corrected. "There are still people who know your heart, Ethan Miller. Don't you dare give up." Lily abandoned her soup to climb into her father's lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "We can live in a castle, Daddy, or a treehouse." Despite everything, Ethan found himself chuckling. He hugged her tight, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. "Maybe not a castle, sunshine, but we'll figure something out." Maria stayed until the sun began to set, helping them pack and offering whatever comfort she could. When she finally left, she pressed a key into Ethan's hand. "The bakery's back door. If you need anything at all, you come, day or night." After Lily's bedtime routine, unchanged despite the boxes crowding their small space, Ethan knelt beside her bed. The streetlight outside cast shadows through their thin curtains, and the familiar glow of the Sweet Grace Bakery sign flickered nearby. The same sign he'd repaired with such hope just weeks ago. "Dear God," he whispered, his daughter's small hand clasped in his. "I know I haven't always been the best at talking to you, but I need your help now. Not for me, for Lily. She deserves so much better than this. Please, please, show me the way." Lily's steady breathing told him she'd fallen asleep. Ethan carefully tucked her blanket around her shoulders and moved to the kitchen table. The bakery sign's gentle light spilled across the scattered papers and unpaid bills. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. "Dear Grace, I hope this letter finds you feeling better. The doctors say you're getting stronger every day, and I thank God for that. You probably won't get this until after we're gone, but I needed to write it anyway. Thank you for believing in me when nobody else would. That $100 bill you left in Lily's birthday cake didn't just buy us groceries, it bought us hope. And later, when you gave me a real chance to prove myself, you gave me back my dignity. I'm sorry it all fell apart. I'm sorry I couldn't be the person you thought I was. But please know that your kindness changed me forever. Whatever happens next, I'll keep trying to be someone worth believing in. Get well soon, Mrs. Montgomery. The town needs your grace more than ever. Sincerely, Ethan Miller." He folded the letter carefully, sealing it in an envelope. Across town, in a quiet hospital room, Grace Montgomery's eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. But Ethan didn't know that. As he wrote her name on the envelope, his tears smudging the ink, the bakery sign flickered once more, casting its warm glow through their window like a distant star, constant, even in the darkest night. Morning light crept through the half-empty apartment, casting long shadows across stacked moving boxes. The space felt hollow now, their few possessions sorted and packed away. The walls, stripped of family photos, showed pale rectangles where memories once hung. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, mechanically folding a dish towel that had somehow escaped the packing. His shoulders sagged with the weight of defeat, his movements slow and purposeless. The morning coffee pot sat cold and unused. He hadn't bothered to unpack it. Lily padded into the kitchen in her fuzzy pink slippers, her dark hair still messy from sleep. She clutched something small in her hand, moving with the careful determination of a child carrying something precious. When she reached the counter, she gently placed a single birthday candle next to where her father stood, the last remaining memento from her special day at Sweet Grace Bakery. "Maybe we can wish again," she said softly, her small fingers straightening the slightly bent candle. "Like on my birthday. That wish came true, remember?" Ethan's hand stilled on the dish towel. He looked down at his daughter, her face tilted up toward him with complete trust. The morning light caught the hope in her eyes, and something inside his chest cracked open. "The nice lady at the bakery said wishes are like prayers," Lily continued, touching the candle's unused wick. "And you always say God listens, right, Daddy?" A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He knelt down beside her, his worn jeans creasing at the knees. "Yes, sunshine, he does." "Then maybe," Lily's voice grew excited, "maybe he's waiting for us to ask for help again, Like when you fixed Mrs. Grace's houses. You didn't give up then. Her words hit him like a revelation. All this time, he'd been ready to run, to pack up and disappear rather than face the whispers and accusations. But running meant teaching Lily that shame was stronger than truth, that fear could override faith. Ethan stood up slowly, his mind suddenly clear. He walked to the bedroom and pulled out the old briefcase he'd stored under his bed. Inside were carefully organized folders, every receipt from materials he'd bought for Grace's properties, bank statements showing exactly where every dollar had gone, before and after photos of the renovation work, and signed testimonials from satisfied tenants. His hands moved with renewed purpose as he gathered the documents. He'd kept meticulous records, a habit from his construction foreman days. Every transaction, every repair, every decision documented with the precision of a man who knew the value of accountability. "What are you doing, Daddy?" Lily asked, watching him from the doorway, fighting back sunshine. He managed a small smile. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. He called Maria, his voice steady for the first time in days. "Could you watch Lily for a few hours? There's something I need to do." Maria arrived 20 minutes later, bringing the smell of fresh bread and concern in her eyes. "Ethan, are you sure about this?" "More sure than I've been in a long time." He hugged Lily tight, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Be good for Miss Maria, okay? Daddy's going to fix things." "Like you fix houses?" Lily asked, her face brightening. "Something like that." He kissed her forehead. "Sometimes the most important repairs are the ones people can't see." He gathered his briefcase and straightened his collar in the hallway mirror. His reflection showed a man tired but determined, someone who had finally remembered his own worth. The walk toward town hall felt different this time. Instead of shrinking from the sidewalk whispers, Ethan held his head high. The weight of his briefcase reminded him of every honest hour worked, every skill applied with care, every promise kept. At the corner of Main Street, he paused to look back at his apartment building. Through the second-floor window, he could see Lily waving, Maria's hand on her shoulder. His daughter's birthday candle still sat on the counter, waiting for a wish. But Ethan didn't need wishes anymore. He had something stronger, the truth, and a 7-year-old's unwavering faith in her father. He turned back toward town hall, his steps purposeful and steady. The morning sun warmed his face as he walked, carrying proof of his integrity in one hand and his daughter's trust in his heart. The stone steps of town hall rose before him, each one a challenge to overcome. Ethan took them one at a time, just as he had rebuilt his life, step by step, day by day, choice by choice. The old town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half of Willow Creek. Late afternoon sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across concerned faces. The air felt thick with tension and whispered judgments. Richard Doyle stood at the podium, his expensive suit gleaming under fluorescent lights. His perfectly styled silver hair and practiced smile exuded confidence as he gestured to a stack of papers before him. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council," he began, his voice smooth as honey, "I have evidence that Mr. Miller has been systematically deceiving Mrs. Montgomery. Bank statements showing irregular transfers, work orders with inflated costs." In the back row, Ethan's hands trembled slightly. He looked down at his worn work boots, covered in sawdust from that morning's repairs. Lily's words echoed in his mind. "Maybe that nice lady didn't save us so you'd quit." He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to watch as he walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the quiet chamber. "I'd like to speak," Ethan said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. He reached the front and turned to face his neighbors, people who'd smiled at him in the bakery, whose homes he'd fixed, whose children played with Lily. "I've made mistakes," he began, his voice catching slightly. He cleared his throat and continued stronger. "But I don't steal. I build. That's what I've always done." Richard Doyle's laugh cut through the air like a knife. "Your criminal record says otherwise, Mr. Miller." "That charge was dropped," a new voice called out. Maria Alvarez stood up, her baker's apron still dusted with flour. "I've watched this man work every day for months. He fixes things others would throw away. He treats my old bakery like it's made of gold." Another figure rose, Tom Henderson, one of Grace's tenants. "Ethan replaced my whole front porch last month, charged less than half what others quoted, spent extra time teaching my boy about carpentry too." "And what about the church bell tower?" Pastor David Green's calm voice carried from the middle rows. "Ethan volunteered his weekends to restore it. Never asked for a penny. More voices joined in, each sharing stories of Ethan's work, his kindness, his integrity. Richard's confident smile began to falter. Then the heavy double doors at the back of the hall groaned open. The room fell silent once more as Grace Montgomery entered, pushed in her wheelchair by her nurse. She looked pale and tired, but her eyes sparkled with determination. She wore a simple blue dress, her silver hair neatly arranged, a stark contrast to her usual elegant attire. "Mrs. Montgomery," Richard stammered, "you should be in the hospital." "I should be exactly where I am," Grace interrupted, her voice soft but clear. The nurse wheeled her toward the front. "In my town, defending a good man." She reached for Ethan's hand as she passed him, giving it a gentle squeeze. The simple gesture brought tears to his eyes. "I've known Richard Doyle for 20 years, Grace continued, addressing the room. "He's been trying to buy my property since my husband died, always talking about progress, about development." She paused, looking around the room. "But what he really wants is to tear down the heart of this town, to replace our homes with parking lots, our bakeries with chain stores." Richard's face reddened. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Grace's voice grew stronger. "I've watched Ethan Miller rebuild not just houses, but hope. He fixed Mrs. Wilson's roof when it leaked, and then stayed to help her organize her husband's old tools. He repaired the Thompson kids' bicycle and taught them how to maintain it themselves. Every repair he's done, every hour he's worked, is documented right here." She patted a folder in her lap. "The only man stealing here," she declared, fixing Richard with a steady gaze, "is the one trying to rob this town of its heart." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard Doyle's carefully constructed accusations crumbled in the face of Grace's quiet authority and the community's united voice. Ethan stood there, overwhelmed by the support surrounding him. He thought of all the broken things he'd fixed over the years: doors, windows, pipes, and fences. But perhaps the most important repair had been to his own faith in humanity, mended piece by piece through the kindness of people like Maria, Grace, and every person who'd just spoken up for him. The council chairman cleared his throat. "Well, I think we've heard enough to dismiss these accusations. Mr. Doyle, you may want to reconsider your position in this community." Richard gathered his papers with shaking hands, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. As he stormed toward the exit, his footsteps echoed in the suddenly quiet hall. Grace reached out and took Ethan's hand again. "You see," she whispered, "sometimes the strongest foundations are built on faith in each other." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the town hall's tall windows as Grace Montgomery's wheelchair was carefully guided to the front of the room. Despite her recent illness, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her silver hair neatly styled and her pale blue suit pressed to perfection. The crowd fell silent, even Richard Doyle's confident smirk faltering slightly. "I've known this town for 63 years, Grace began, her voice soft but clear. "I've watched children grow into parents, dreams turn into businesses, and strangers become family." She paused, her eyes scanning the familiar faces. "And in all those years, I've learned that character isn't measured by the mistakes we make, but by how we help others when they need it most." She gestured toward Ethan, who stood with his hands clasped tightly together, his work-worn knuckles white with tension. "7 years ago, on a storm-dark night, my late husband Charles and I were stranded on Highway 23. Our tire was flat, the rain was pouring, and Charles was too weak from his cancer treatments to change it himself." Her voice softened with memory. "A truck pulled over, and out stepped Ethan Miller. He didn't know us, didn't ask for anything in return. He just changed our tire in that freezing rain, made sure we were safe, and disappeared into the night." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several older residents nodded, remembering Charles Montgomery and his battle with cancer. "Charles never forgot that kindness," Grace continued. "He told me, that man, that's the kind of person we need more of in this world." And he was right. She turned to face Richard Doyle, her expression hardening slightly. "Which is why I find it particularly distressing that some would try to destroy a good man's reputation for profit." From her wheelchair, Grace removed a folder and handed it to the town clerk. "In that folder, you'll find documented evidence of Mr. Doyle's attempts to pressure property owners into selling through intimidation and false accusations. You'll also find every receipt, every invoice, and every hour Ethan has worked on our community projects, all meticulously recorded and verified by 3 independent accountants." Richard's face had lost its polished veneer, a slight sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. He started to speak, but Grace raised her hand, silencing him with a look that carried the weight of her years and position. "But numbers and documents aren't why we're really here," she said, her voice warming again. "We're here because this town needs to decide what kind of community we want to be. One that tears down good people when they're trying to rebuild their lives? Or one that lifts them up?" She motioned to her nurse, who helped her turn her wheelchair to fully face the assembly. "Today, I'm announcing my decision to name Ethan Miller as co-owner of Montgomery Community Housing Project. This initiative will transform our empty properties into affordable homes for struggling families, just as Charles always dreamed." The room erupted in surprised gasps and scattered applause. Maria Alvarez, sitting in the front row, wiped tears from her eyes with her apron. Several council members were nodding approvingly. "This project will provide not just housing, but hope," Grace continued, her voice growing stronger. "And who better to lead it than someone who knows firsthand what it means to need a second chance? Someone who, even when facing his own struggles, never stopped helping others?" The applause grew louder, spreading through the room like a wave. People began standing, their faces bright with emotion and purpose. Richard Doyle, his plans crumbling around him, quietly gathered his papers and slipped toward the exit. Ethan stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. His legs gave way, and he dropped to his knees beside Grace's wheelchair, taking her frail hand in his calloused ones. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Grace squeezed his hand, her eyes twinkling with warmth and wisdom. "That's why you do," she said softly, just loud enough for him to hear over the continuing applause. The afternoon sun had shifted, painting the town hall in warm golden light. As Ethan knelt there, holding Grace's hand, the shadows of his past seemed to fade in the glow of newfound purpose and redemption. The applause continued, a standing ovation for a man who had finally found his way home. The late summer breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and sawdust across the sprawling farmhouse lawn, mingling with the sweet fragrance of the wildflowers that had been planted along the newly constructed stone walkway. Ethan Miller stood at the bottom of the freshly built wheelchair ramp, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he smoothed down his clean work shirt. His heart hammered against his ribs with an anticipation so fierce it nearly took his breath away. After 3 months of 18-hour days, scraped knuckles, and countless prayers whispered over sawhorses and paint cans, this moment had finally arrived. The sleek black town car pulled up slowly along the circular gravel driveway, its tires crunching softly over the carefully laid stones. Nurse Janine Harper emerged first, her efficient movements betraying none of the emotion Ethan knew she must be feeling. She opened the passenger door with practiced care and began the gentle process of helping Grace Montgomery transfer from the car seat to her lightweight wheelchair. "Welcome home," Ethan said softly, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer hide. The words came out barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of everything he'd poured into this project. Every board he'd measured twice, every coat of paint he'd applied with reverent precision. Grace's eyes, still sharp despite her recent health struggles, sparkled with unshed tears as she took in the completely transformed farmhouse before her. The old structure that had been slowly crumbling under years of neglect now stood proud and welcoming. The peeling, weather-beaten paint had been replaced with a warm sage green that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. The broken shutters, once hanging at awkward angles, had been lovingly restored to their original rustic charm. Bright flowering window boxes bursting with purple petunias and trailing ivy now brightened every windowsill, adding splashes of color that made the entire building seem to smile. Her gaze lingered appreciatively on the fresh gravel pathway that curved gracefully from the driveway to the front porch, specifically designed with her wheelchair's narrow wheels in mind. Even the old oak trees had been carefully pruned to create a natural canopy over the walkway, providing shade while allowing dappled sunlight to filter through. "Ethan, it's more beautiful than I ever imagined," she whispered, her voice catching as she reached out with one trembling hand to clasp his work, roughened fingers. "I can feel Thomas's spirit in every board, every window. You've brought his vision to life." Nurse Harper wheeled Grace up the gently sloped ramp, past the wraparound porch, where new rocking chairs waited invitingly. Ethan had built each chair by hand, sanding them to silky smoothness and painting them the same sage green as the house trim. He held open the front door, a solid oak door he'd rescued from a demolition site and lovingly refinished, and watched Grace's face as she entered her transformed home. Inside, the cramped, outdated farmhouse had been completely reimagined. The walls had been strategically removed and rebuilt to create 4 separate family apartments, each with its own fully equipped kitchen, cozy living space, and private entrance for dignity and independence. The hallways had been widened to 8 feet across, far more than the minimum required for wheelchair accessibility. Ethan had insisted on the extra space, knowing that Grace would want room to move freely without feeling confined. The original hardwood floors had been painstakingly restored, each plank sanded and sealed until they gleamed like honey in the afternoon light streaming through the oversized windows. Crown molding that Ethan had crafted himself in the evenings added elegant touches that honored the farmhouse's original character while embracing its new purpose. "The Johnson family moves in tomorrow morning," Ethan explained as they toured the ground floor apartment, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and humility. "Sarah Johnson, she's a single mom with 3 kids, ages 6 to 12. She lost her job at the textile plant during COVID and never quite recovered financially. Been living in her car for the past 2 months. Grace nodded slowly, her eyes taking in every detail. The child-safe cabinet latches, the extra electrical outlets positioned at wheelchair height, the bathroom grab bars that had been installed with both safety and dignity in mind. "She'll have a fresh start here," Grace murmured, understanding flooding her weathered features. "And the upstairs apartments?" she asked, noticing the beautifully crafted staircase with its smooth banister that Ethan had turned himself on a borrowed lathe. "The Veterans Association helped us connect with 2 families. Both fathers are recently back from overseas deployments, trying to rebuild their lives and reconnect with families who barely know them anymore." Ethan's voice carried the weight of understanding. He knew what it meant to feel like a stranger in your own life. "Good men who just need time and space to heal. We're calling the whole place Grace House." The name seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. The front door chimed with the sweet melody of wind chimes Lily had helped select, and Maria Alvarez bustled through, her arms laden with several warm loaves of bread wrapped in her signature checkered cloth. The incredible aroma of fresh-baked goodness immediately filled the air, transforming the house from a construction project into a real home where families would gather around dinner tables and children would grow up safe and loved. "My special recipe," Maria announced with her characteristic warmth, setting the fragrant loaves on the newly installed granite kitchen counter that Ethan had found discounted at a local stone yard. "I'm calling it Second Chance Bread. A little sweetness for hope, a little salt for tears, and lots of love baked right in with my own 2 hands." For the past month, Maria had been arriving every morning at dawn with fresh loaves for the volunteer crew. The local hardware store owner had donated supplies at cost. The high school woodshop teacher had brought his entire advanced class to help with finish work. Even the town's 78-year-old retired electrician had climbed ladders to install new fixtures, muttering good-naturedly about young folks who don't know a wire nut from a wall switch. The transformation had begun after the truth about Richard Doyle's manipulation and lies had finally come to light during that pivotal town meeting. One by one, neighbors who had shunned Ethan began showing up at the construction site, work gloves in hand and apologies on their lips. 7-year-old Lily appeared from behind Maria's colorful skirts, her small hands completely covered in bright blue and gold paint that had somehow managed to streak across her cheek and into her dark hair. She'd been working on her special surprise project all morning, refusing to let anyone see until it was completely finished. "Miss Grace, look what I made for you," Lily exclaimed, her voice bubbling with the kind of pure excitement that only children could manage. She grabbed Grace's hand with her paint-sticky fingers and led the wheelchair toward the common room that connected all 4 apartments. The far wall had been transformed into Lily's masterpiece, a massive heart with delicate, outstretched wings that seemed to flutter across the white painted surface. The heart itself was painted in soft blues that reminded Grace of summer skies, while the wings were done in gentle golds that caught the light like actual feathers. Around the heart, Lily had added smaller symbols, tiny houses, stick figure families holding hands, flowers, and even a small bakery with smoke curling from its chimney. Above the heart, in careful children's lettering that had clearly taken enormous concentration, she'd written, "Grace lives here," in purple paint. Below it, in smaller letters, she'd added, "Where families grow like flowers." Grace's eyes immediately welled with tears as she wheeled closer to examine every detail of the mural, her weathered hands pressed against her chest as if trying to contain the overwhelming emotion that threatened to spill over. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of joy and awe. "It's absolutely perfect, more beautiful than anything I've ever seen." Ethan stood watching his daughter beam with pride, her paint-covered face glowing with satisfaction. He remembered, with startling clarity, How just months ago, they'd been packing their few belongings into cardboard boxes, preparing to leave town in shame and defeat. The Ethan from that dark time could never have imagined this moment. Watching Lily skip confidently through the hallways of Grace House like she owned the place, chatting easily with volunteers and helping Maria distribute her second chance bread to hungry workers who had become like extended family. The afternoon passed in a warm blur of meaningful activity. Maria organized the commercial-grade kitchen she'd helped design, complete with industrial mixers and multiple ovens for the cooking classes she planned to teach the resident families. She'd already developed a curriculum that would cover everything from basic nutrition to budgeting for groceries, determined to give these families every tool they needed for independence. Meanwhile, volunteers moved donated furniture into the apartments, items contributed by townspeople who had cleaned out their attics and spare rooms with generous hearts, a solid oak dining table from the Methodist church, bunk beds from a family whose children had grown up, sofas and chairs that had been loved in other homes and now waited to be loved again. Grace positioned her wheelchair by the large bay window in the main common area, overseeing the organized chaos with quiet satisfaction. Ethan noticed how much color had returned to her cheeks since leaving the hospital 3 weeks ago, how her eyes had regained their characteristic sparkle of determination and purpose. The heart attack had slowed her down, but it hadn't dimmed the fire that drove her to help others. "Your husband would be so proud of what you've accomplished here," Ethan said softly as he joined her by the window, looking out at the volunteers carrying in the last of the donated items. This was his dream, wasn't it? Helping families rebuild their lives from the ground up? Grace nodded slowly, her fingertips touching the cool window glass as if she could reach through it to touch something precious and just out of reach. Thomas always said that everyone deserves not just a roof over their head, but a place where they can plant roots and watch hope grow again. She turned to study Ethan's face, seeing past his modest expression to the heart underneath. He had such faith in the power of second chances. He would have liked you very much, Ethan. Would have recognized a kindred spirit immediately. As the golden evening light began to slant through the windows, the volunteers started gathering their tools and heading home to their own families. Maria packed up her bread-making supplies with efficient movements, promising to return first thing in the morning with fresh loaves for the incoming Johnson family. "That oldest boy is going to need some meat on his bones," she declared after meeting 12-year-old Marcus Johnson the previous week. Lily had finally abandoned her paintbrush and curled up like a sleepy kitten on the cushioned window seat, tired from her artistic efforts, but still stealing proud glances at her mural every few minutes. Paint smudges decorated her clothes and arms like colorful badges of honor. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and deep pinks, the light streaming through the newly cleaned windows and casting everything in a warm, golden glow that seemed almost magical. Ethan stepped out onto the front porch, his work boots echoing on the solid planks he'd laid with his own hands. Behind him, the old farmhouse hummed with quiet energy, no longer the empty, decaying structure he'd first seen, but a place filled with purpose and infinite possibility. He thought about the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. From a desperate, broken father clutching his last $10 bill in a bakery, certain he'd lost everything worth having, to a man entrusted with rebuilding not just houses and hopes, but an entire community's faith in the power of redemption. The transformation seemed almost impossible to believe, like something from a story rather than his own life. The evening air was growing cooler, carrying the promise of autumn and new beginnings. Ethan pulled his jacket closer and watched the last traces of daylight fade into the gentle purple of twilight. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, tiny points of light that reminded him of all the small acts of kindness that had led to this moment. Tomorrow would bring the Johnson family to their new home. Next week, the two veteran families would arrive with their own stories of struggle and hope. Grace House would come alive with the sounds of children playing, families cooking together, neighbors becoming friends. The common room with Lily's beautiful mural would host birthday parties and homework sessions and quiet conversations between people learning to trust again. Standing there in the peaceful evening air, Ethan whispered quietly to himself, "Every ending can be rebuilt into something beautiful." The words felt like a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for the mysterious ways that grace could transform even the most broken situations into something whole and good. The first stars of the evening twinkled overhead as the golden light of Grace House spilled out through its windows, illuminating Lily's heart-shaped mural and casting warm shadows across all the fresh paint and new beginnings contained within those walls. In that perfect moment, as night settled gently over their rebuilt world, Absolutely everything felt possible. Golden sunlight bathed the restored farmhouse as cars lined the gravel driveway. Colorful balloons bobbed in the late summer breeze, and hand-painted signs reading "Welcome Home" and "Community Housing Grand Opening" decorated the freshly painted porch. The smell of Maria's cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee wafted through the open windows. Ethan adjusted his borrowed tie nervously as he watched the black town car approach. His daughter Lily, wearing her Sunday best, bounced on her toes beside him. "Is Miss Grace here?" she whispered excitedly. The car door opened, and Grace's nurse helped her into her wheelchair. Even after her hospital stay, Grace Montgomery carried herself with quiet dignity. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, and her eyes sparkled with joy as she took in the crowd gathered on the lawn. "Oh my," she breathed, pressing a hand to her heart. The townspeople broke into spontaneous applause as Ethan stepped forward to wheel her up the newly built ramp. The farmhouse lawn had transformed into a celebration space. Folding chairs faced a small podium, and tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes. Children darted between adults' legs, playing tag. Maria had set up a dessert station with treats from Sweet Grace Bakery, and the local church choir gathered near the porch steps. Pastor Robert stepped to the microphone first. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "we're here today to celebrate more than just a building. We're here to celebrate the power of second chances and the strength of community." The choir broke into "Amazing Grace," their voices rising sweet and clear in the morning air. Ethan noticed several people wiping away tears, including Maria, who stood proudly by her display of baked goods. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, his hands trembled as he approached the podium. Lily gave him a thumbs up from her seat in the front row, and he found his courage. "A few months ago," he began, his voice growing steadier, "I walked into Sweet Grace Bakery with my last $10, trying to buy a birthday cake for my little girl." He paused, swallowing hard. "What I found instead was something money can't buy: faith. Faith in humanity, faith in second chances, and faith that God hasn't forgotten any of us." The crowd grew quiet, hanging on his words. Even the children stopped playing to listen. "Maria Alvarez showed me kindness when I needed it most," he continued, gesturing to the baker, who dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "She reminded me that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change a life forever." Ethan turned to Grace, who sat regally in her wheelchair, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And Mrs. Montgomery, Grace, you saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. You didn't just give me a job, you gave me back my dignity. You showed me that our past doesn't have to define our future." He looked out at the gathered faces. Neighbors who had once whispered about his criminal record now smiled encouragingly. "To every stranger who ever believed in someone like me, thank you. This place isn't just about housing, it's about hope. It's about giving people a chance to rebuild their lives, just like all of you helped me rebuild mine." The applause that followed was deafening. Maria hugged him as he stepped down, and several townspeople patted his back. Even Richard Doyle's former assistant approached to shake his hand, apologizing for believing the lies. As the celebration continued, children explored the renovated apartments while their parents discussed application procedures with the housing committee. The local newspaper photographer captured images of Grace cutting a ceremonial ribbon, Lily holding the scissors with her. The afternoon wore on with music from local musicians, children playing on the new playground equipment, and neighbors sharing stories over coffee and Maria's pastries. The sense of community was palpable, healing old wounds, bridging divides, creating something new from what was broken. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Grace motioned Ethan to wheel her to a quiet corner of the porch. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse. "Ethan," she said softly, "there's one more thing we need to discuss." She pulled out a small brass key, its surface worn smooth with age. Taking his hand, she pressed the key into his palm. "This is for the bakery. It's yours now." Ethan stared at the key in disbelief, his throat too tight to speak. In that small piece of metal, he held not just a business, but a symbol of everything he'd fought to rebuild: trust, hope, and the chance to help others the way he'd been helped. The morning sun streamed through the newly installed stained glass windows of Sweet Grace Community Bakery, casting rainbow patterns across the freshly mopped floors. Each colored beam danced like tiny miracles, painting the walls in shades of amber, emerald, and rose. Ethan Miller balanced carefully on a stepladder, his weathered hands steady as he hung streamers in pink and purple, Lily's favorite colors. The familiar scent of vanilla and warm bread filled the air, mixing with the aroma of cinnamon rolls that had been rising since dawn. As Maria worked her magic in the kitchen, the bakery hummed with quiet energy, the kind that comes from a place where dreams have taken root and flourished. Ethan paused in his decorating, taking in the transformation that still amazed him. 12 months ago, he'd walked through these same doors with his last $10, broken and desperate. Now, he was preparing to give away birthday cake to anyone who needed it. "A little higher on the left, Jeffe," Maria called out, using her playful nickname for him. She emerged from the kitchen like a flour-dusted angel, wiping her hands onto her favorite apron, the one with tiny sunflowers that Lily had picked out for her last Christmas. "Perfect. Now it looks like a proper princess party." Ethan climbed down, his boots touching the polished wooden floors. He'd refinished himself during those long, healing months when his hands needed work and his heart needed purpose. He surveyed their handiwork with the pride of a man who'd learned to appreciate small victories. The bakery had transformed over the past year, evolving from a simple neighborhood shop into something Grace had always envisioned, a true community heart. New tables and chairs dotted the expanded dining area, each one handcrafted by him during quiet evenings when Lily did her homework at the counter and Maria hummed old Mexican lullabies. The wood bore the gentle imperfections of handmade things, tiny gaps between boards, slight variations in stain color, that spoke of love rather than mass production. Children's artwork decorated the walls in a riot of color and imagination. Drawings of hearts, flowers, and stick figure families covered every available space, each one carefully matted and framed as if it belonged in a museum. Above the counter, the refurbished sign glowed warmly in script letters that caught the morning light. "Sweet Grace Community Bakery, where everyone belongs." Ethan had carved those words himself, spending 3 evenings getting the curves just right, knowing that Grace would read them every time she visited. The front door burst open with the energy that only an 8-year-old could muster. Lily bounced through the entrance, her pink backpack decorated with butterfly patches she'd sewn on herself, bumping against her small frame with each enthusiastic step. "Daddy, is everything ready?" Her eyes widened at the decorations, scanning the streamers and balloons with the wonder of a child who still believed in magic. Her mouth formed a perfect O of surprise, the same expression she'd worn when she'd blown out her candles last year with that $5 cake. "Almost sunshine." Ethan scooped her up, though she was getting almost too big for that now. Her legs dangled past his waist, and he could feel how she'd grown stronger, more solid in his arms. "Why don't you help Maria with the party favors while I finish up the last few decorations?" Maria beckoned Lily behind the counter, with arms that had embraced half the town's children at one point or another. "Come, mi amor. Show me how good you are at counting." Behind the register, dozens of small paper bags waited to be filled with heart-shaped cookies, each one individually decorated with pink and white icing. Maria had stayed up until midnight the night before, making sure every cookie was perfect. As they worked together, Lily's small fingers carefully placing cookies into bags, while Maria tied each one with curly ribbon, families began arriving through the glass door. The bell chimed again and again, each ring announcing another guest. But these weren't just families who could afford fancy birthday parties at expensive venues. These were the people who'd become Ethan's extended family over the past year, the ones who understood what it meant to struggle and what it felt like to be lifted up. The mother who'd lost her job at the textile factory came in with her twin boys, their faces scrubbed clean and their hair combed with the special care reserved for important occasions. The veteran who lived in one of Grace's renovated houses arrived with his daughter, her hand tucked safely in his as they marveled at the decorations. The foster family from down the street entered quietly, their 3 children staying close together with the wariness of kids who'd learned not to expect too much from life. Each child clutched a handmade invitation that Lily had carefully colored herself, spending hours at the kitchen table with her box of 64 crayons, making sure everyone was unique. She'd drawn flowers and butterflies in the margins and written, "You are invited to my birthday," in her best cursive handwriting. "Remember when you could barely afford 1 slice of day-old bread?" Maria whispered to Ethan as they watched the bakery fill with the sound of laughing children and parents greeting each other like old friends. "Now look at you, giving away whole cakes and making sure no child goes without." Ethan's throat tightened with the familiar swell of gratitude that still caught him off guard. "Thanks to Grace," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "No." Maria shook her head firmly, pausing in her work to face him fully. Her dark eyes held the wisdom of a woman who'd seen heartbreak and healing in equal measure. "Thanks to you believing in yourself enough to accept help when it was offered. That's what Grace really gave you. Permission to rise up and become who you were always meant to be." The bell above the door chimed again, this time with the softer sound that announced important arrivals. Nurse Janine Harper wheeled Grace Montgomery through the entrance, moving slowly to accommodate the oxygen tank that had become Grace's constant companion. Despite her physical frailty, the way her hands trembled slightly and her breathing required assistance, Grace looked elegant as always in her pale blue dress, with pearl buttons and the silver locket she never removed. Grace's eyes, though dimmed by illness, still sparkled with the same inner strength that had changed Ethan's life exactly 1 year ago. She surveyed the transformed bakery with obvious satisfaction, taking in every detail from the children's artwork to the way natural light streamed through the stained glass windows she'd commissioned as her gift to the community. "There's my birthday girl," Grace called out, her voice carrying across the room despite its fragility. Lily ran to hug her carefully, having learned to be mindful of the oxygen tube and the way Grace's bones felt more delicate now. But Grace's embrace was still strong, still full of the love that had made all of this possible. The sight of them together, his daughter and the woman who'd become like a grandmother to her, made Ethan's chest tight with emotions he was still learning to name. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. The knowledge that some people enter your life not just to help you, but to teach you how to help others. Ethan gathered everyone around the largest table, the one he'd built specifically for occasions like this. It could seat 16 people comfortably, with room for wheelchairs and high chairs and all the accommodations a truly inclusive space required. In the center stood a 3-tiered cake that was Maria's masterpiece, each layer decorated with edible flowers and butterflies made from sugar, just like the ones Lily loved to chase in Grace's garden during their Sunday visits. The cake was almost too beautiful to eat, with delicate purple violets and yellow roses cascading down the sides like a waterfall of spring. Maria had worked on it for 2 days, crafting each flower by hand with the patience of someone who understood that art and love were often the same thing. "Before we sing," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the now quiet room as conversations faded and faces turned toward him, "I want to tell you all a story. It's about a man who thought he had nothing left to give to the world, or anyone in it." He met Grace's eyes across the room, seeing her slight nod of encouragement, but someone taught him that when you think you have nothing, that's exactly when giving matters most. He told them about the day he'd walked into this very bakery, clutching his last $10 and unable to afford a simple birthday cake for his daughter. How one act of kindness from Maria had sparked another from Grace, and how that kindness had rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves that touched everyone in the room. He spoke about the shame he'd carried, the way it felt to believe you were forgotten by the world, and how one person's faith could resurrect hope in the most unlikely places. His voice grew stronger as he talked about the renovation projects that had given him purpose, the way the community had slowly opened their hearts to him, and how he'd learned that second chances weren't something you earned. They were something you accepted with grace. "That's why today, we're not just celebrating Lily's birthday," he continued, looking around the room at faces that had become dear to him. "We're celebrating everyone who's ever needed a second chance. Every child who deserves cake on their birthday. Every person who deserves to know they matter, they're seen, and they're loved exactly as they are." Maria dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her sunflower apron, her emotional walls crumbling the way they always did when Ethan spoke from his heart. You're gonna make me ruin my makeup," she scolded, but her smile was radiant, lighting up her face like sunrise over mountains. "Now," Ethan called out, clapping his hands together, "let me see who needs cake." A chorus of small voices responded enthusiastically, hands shooting up in the air as if cake were the most important thing in the world. And maybe, Ethan thought, watching their faces, it was. He and Maria moved behind the counter like a well-practiced team, serving slice after slice with the care of parents feeding their own children. They made sure every child got their favorite color of frosting flour, asking each one what they preferred and taking their answers seriously. The bakery rang with laughter and the kind of pure joy that comes from simple pleasures shared freely among people who understand their value. "Daddy." Lily tugged at his sleeve, flour somehow already dusting her party dress, despite not helping with the baking. "Can I give out the party bags now?" "Of course, sunshine. Remember what we talked about?" Lily nodded solemnly, her face taking on the serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. Giving is the best present because it makes your heart grow bigger, and when your heart grows bigger, there's more room for love. She skipped from table to table with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted her place in the world, distributing bags with careful attention to make sure no one was missed. Each bag contained not just heart-shaped cookies, but a small note saying, "You are loved," in Lily's careful handwriting, her own idea. born from a desire to make sure everyone felt as special as she did. Finally, as the afternoon light began to slant through the windows in golden streams, it was time for Lily's own cake. 8 candles, one for each year of her life, and one to grow on, flickered in the dimmed light as everyone gathered close in a circle of warmth and belonging. Grace's wheelchair was positioned at the head of the table, where she could see everything, her weathered hands folded in her lap and her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. The familiar melody of Happy Birthday swelled through the bakery, voices joining together in the universal song of celebration. Some sang in English, others in Spanish, but the harmony was perfect in its imperfection. Ethan watched his daughter's face glowing in the candlelight, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that could light up the darkest corners of the world. She wasn't just his little girl anymore. She was hope personified, living proof that love could multiply when shared freely, that kindness could grow like seeds planted in good soil. In her face, he saw all the possibilities that Grace had helped him believe in again. When he glanced over at Grace, he saw tears shining in her eyes, but her smile was brighter than all 8 candles combined. She caught his gaze and nodded once, slowly and deliberately, as if to say, "This is exactly what I dreamed of when I tucked that $100 bill into a cake box and changed both our lives forever." The birthday celebration had been everything Ethan hoped for and more. Dozens of children from all over Willow Creek had filled the bakery with laughter and joy, their faces lighting up as they each received their own slice of cake. The afternoon had stretched on for hours, filled with games, stories, and the kind of pure happiness that only children could create. Now, as evening settled over the town like a gentle blanket, golden light filtered through the windows, while Ethan swept colorful confetti from the wooden floors. The bakery still held the lingering sweetness of vanilla frosting and chocolate cake. Streamers hung from the ceiling beams, and a few forgotten balloons bobbed lazily in the corners. The whole space felt alive with the echoes of celebration, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the joy of the day. Maria had left early, saying something about a family emergency. She'd hugged him tighter than usual before leaving, her weathered hands gripping his shoulders with unusual intensity, her dark eyes misty with unshed tears. At the time, he'd attributed it to the emotional day, seeing all those happy families together, witnessing how far they'd come since that first $5 cake a year ago. But now, in the quiet aftermath, something about her behavior nagged at him. The broom made soft swishing sounds against the floor as Ethan worked, his movements peaceful and methodical. Each sweep gathered bits of rainbow sprinkles and torn wrapping paper, the remnants of childhood joy. The familiar rhythm of cleaning soothed him, just as it always had. Work had become his prayer, his meditation, his way of finding peace in a world that had once seemed determined to break him. Lily sat at one of the small round tables near the window, contentedly arranging her birthday presents in careful piles. Books with bright covers, a new set of watercolor paints, colored pencils that gleam like precious jewels, and a special charm bracelet from Grace, who hadn't been able to attend the party. The bracelet caught the evening light, each tiny silver charm telling its own story. A little house, a star, a heart. She promised she'd come later, Lily had said earlier, her 7-year-old voice full of innocent faith. But something in Maria's expression when she delivered that message had seemed off. A shadow had crossed the baker's face, gone so quickly, Ethan almost missed it. As Ethan moved behind the counter to clean up the last bits of frosting and cake crumbs, his cloth wiping down surfaces that had seen so much transformation over the past year, his eyes caught sight of something that made his heart skip. An elegant cream-colored envelope propped against the old brass cash register, its edges pristine and formal. He recognized the delicate handwriting immediately, Grace's distinctive cursive that somehow managed to look both refined and warm at the same time. Like everything else about her, his heart skipped a beat as he picked up the envelope, his callous fingers gentle against the expensive paper. Something felt different about this note. It felt final, heavy. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, careful not to tear the paper that seemed almost sacred in its perfection. Inside, written in Grace's flowing script with the fountain pen she always used, were 7 words that would change everything. Kindness never ends, it multiplies. A small sound escaped his throat, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The words hit him like a physical blow, because he knew, deep in his soul, in that place where truth lived before the mind could soften it, he knew what this meant. The way Maria had hugged him with such desperate tenderness, Grace's absence at the party despite her promises, the strange heaviness that had hung in the air despite all the celebration. His hands shook as he held the note, reading the words again and again, as if repetition might change their meaning, but Grace's elegant handwriting remained the same. Each letter formed with the care of someone who knew these might be her last words to him. The phone rang then, its sharp trill cutting through his thoughts like a knife through silk. He answered it mechanically, his voice sounding strange and distant to his own ears, already knowing what he would hear. It was Nurse Janine Harper, Grace's caregiver, her professional voice gentle but firm, each word chosen with the precision of someone who had delivered this kind of news before. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Montgomery passed peacefully in her sleep this afternoon. She wanted you to know she waited until after Lily's birthday celebration started, so the day would stay special for her." Ethan's free hand gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white against the worn wood. The bakery seemed to spin around him for a moment, the familiar space suddenly feeling foreign and unreal. "Thank you," he managed to whisper, his voice thick with emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Was she comfortable?" "Very," Janine assured him, her voice warm with genuine affection for the woman they'd both cared about. She was smiling at the end, holding the drawing Lily made her last week, the one with all the flowers. Ethan remembered the drawing. Lily had worked on it for days, carefully coloring each petal, adding butterflies and bees around the edges. Grace had hung it on her refrigerator like it was a masterpiece. After hanging up, Ethan moved as if in a dream to the window display where they kept the special candles, the ones Grace had ordered from France because she loved their soft, steady flame. She'd said they reminded her of hope itself, small but persistent, beautiful in their simplicity. With careful movements, his hands surprisingly steady now, he lit one and placed it on the windowsill. Its warm glow became a tiny beacon in the growing dusk, a lighthouse for a soul that had already found its way home. "Thank you," he whispered to the flame, his voice catching on the words. "For everything. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For showing me what grace really means." Lily looked up from her presents, her innocent eyes immediately noticing the change in her father's demeanor. Children had a way of sensing these things, of feeling the shift in the emotional weather around them. "Daddy, why are you crying?" He opened his arms, and she came to him immediately, abandoning her treasures without hesitation. Her small body fitted perfectly against his chest, like she had since she was tiny. Her warmth a comfort he never took for granted. Outside, the first burst of the town's summer festival fireworks began to paint the sky in brilliant colors. Reds and blues and golds that bloomed like flowers against the darkening canvas of evening. "Miss Grace went to heaven today, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice steady despite the tears that continued to fall. He ran a gentle hand over her silky hair, breathing in the scent of birthday cake and childhood innocence. "She waited until after your party started, 'cause that's the kind of person she was, always thinking of others first." Lily was quiet for a long moment, her small mind processing this information in the way only children could, with a mixture of sadness and acceptance that adults often envied. She pressed her face against his shirt, and he could feel her thinking, working through what this meant. Then she pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but also with something deeper, understanding. "She gave me my first real birthday cake," she said, her voice small but certain. "And she gave you back your smile." The fireworks continued outside, each burst casting alternating shadows and light through the bakery windows. The display illuminated the space Grace had helped transform, not just the physical building with its warm wood and welcoming atmosphere, but the lives within it. The lives throughout the whole town that had been touched by her quiet generosity. Ethan felt tears rolling down his cheeks, but they weren't entirely sad ones. Mixed with the grief was something else, gratitude so profound it felt like prayer, love so deep it transcended loss. He smiled through the tears, holding his daughter close as the sky exploded in celebration above them. "You know what, sweetheart?" he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Maybe we're all someone's miracle. Maybe that's what Miss Grace was trying to teach us all along." Outside, the finale of the fireworks began, the sky filling with cascading stars that seemed to dance just for them. And in the soft glow of the bakery lights, surrounded by the lingering sweetness of birthday cake and the promise of kindness multiplied, the broke single dad realized he had finally become the man his daughter had always believed he was. The man Grace had seen in him from the very beginning. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Miller, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.